Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. I still remember the day I first heard it, my name, whispered through the trees when no one else was there. That was the moment I should have run. But where do you run when you've already escaped to the edge of nowhere? My name is Walter Prescott. I'm 43 years old, and after my wife Sarah died last year, I couldn't stand living among people anymore. Their sad eyes, their awkward sympathy, it was too much. So I took my military pension and bought 80 acres on Echo Mountain in Montana. Just me, my dog Rex, and enough wilderness that I could pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. My cabin sits at the very edge of civilization. Beyond my property line stretches 70 miles of untouched forest. No neighbors, no hikers, no tourists, just trees and silence. Or what should have been silence. The realtor warned me about the echoes, said the mountain had unusual acoustic properties. I thought that meant I might hear my own voice bounce back now and then. I didn't know it meant I'd hear things that shouldn't be there at all. The cabin itself isn't much. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a wood stove, and a living room with windows that look out over the valley. I've got a natural spring for water, plenty of trees for firewood, and enough land to grow food. It was everything I wanted, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts, a place to heal. After Vietnam, being alone felt like the only safe option. The things I saw there, the things I did, they stay with you. The army trained me to track people through impossible terrain, to survive in the harshest conditions, to kill with my bare hands if necessary. But they never trained me for what we found in that jungle. The official reports call it a reconnaissance mission with unexpected casualties. What really happened? Well, that's still classified. Most nights I'd wake up hearing the screams of my team, even though I knew it was just the wind. My doctor called it PTSD, gave me pills that made me feel like I was underwater. So instead, I started making my own medicine, a still behind the cabin that turns out liquor strong enough to knock out the nightmares, at least most nights. I thought I was running from the past. I didn't realize I was running straight into something worse. Initial incidents. The first strange thing I noticed was the stone piles. Not natural, too perfect. 5 rocks stacked in exact triangles, dozens of them scattered through my property. They appeared overnight, and no matter how many times I knocked them down, they'd be back the next morning, in the exact same spots. When I went into town for supplies that first month, people got quiet when I mentioned where I lived. Echo Mountain. Old Pete at the general store raised his eyebrows. Not many folks last up there. What do you mean? I asked, loading up on coffee and ammunition. Pete lowered his voice. People go missing up there. Been happening since the 1800s. Loggers, hunters, whole families sometimes. I laughed it off. Probably just got lost in the woods. It's easy to get turned around out there. No, Pete said, not smiling. They don't get lost. They get taken by the mimics in the pines. I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head and wouldn't say more. I didn't think about it again until the thunderstorm, 3 weeks after I moved in. Rain was pounding on the tin roof, lightning cracking so close I could feel it in my teeth. I was sitting by the fire, Rex curled up at my feet, when I heard it. Walter. Sarah's voice, clear as day, coming from somewhere outside. Walter, I'm cold. Let me in. Rex's head shot up, ears perked. He heard it too. Sarah? My voice cracked. I knew it was impossible. She'd been dead for a year, cancer eating her from the inside out. Please, Walter. I'm so cold out here. Her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the front porch, from the backyard, from deep in the trees. Rex started growling, hackles raised. I checked my rifle, made sure it was loaded, and opened the door. Nothing but rain and darkness. But the voice kept calling, moving around the house like someone was circling it. That was the night I realized something was wrong with this mountain. Early warning signs. The next morning, I hiked out to check the property line. The storm had cleared, but the forest felt different, watching me. A group of deer stood at the edge of a clearing, perfectly still, staring at my cabin. They didn't run when I approached. They didn't even blink. I started keeping a journal, recording everything strange I noticed. I'd speak into an old tape recorder, then play it back while I wrote things down. One night I was listening to that day's entry when I noticed whispers underneath my voice, faint words I never said, in a voice that wasn't mine. I rewound the tape several times, listening closer each time. "He doesn't know yet," the whisper said. "But he will." I threw the recorder across the room. The compass was next. I've always been good with directions, had to be in my line of work. But when I tried to map out some hiking trails, my compass went crazy in certain spots. The needle would spin and spin or point in impossible directions, like straight up. And then there were the traps. I'd set simple snares for rabbits, but I'd find them triggered and empty, reset in ways I never taught anyone. Complex knots I didn't recognize. When Henry, the mail carrier, drove up the long dirt road to deliver a package, he stopped mid-sentence, his head cocked like he was listening. "Did you say something?" he asked me. "No," I replied. "Huh." Sounded like you just asked me if I wanted coffee. He shrugged. "Must be the mountain echo." But I heard it too, my own voice offering coffee seconds before I even thought to ask him. That night I drank until I couldn't see straight, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew. Something on this mountain was watching me, learning from me, and it was getting closer. Winter came early to Echo Mountain. The first snow fell in October, covering everything in white. I needed to go to town for supplies before the roads got too bad. But something strange happened when I tried to leave. The forest had always been thick, but that morning it seemed to have grown overnight. Trees I didn't remember seeing before blocked the path. My truck couldn't get through. I grabbed my axe and started clearing, but after an hour I was sweating even in the cold. The trees seemed endless. "This isn't right," I muttered, checking my map. According to it, the road should be clear. But it wasn't. Not anymore. I decided to hike out instead. The snow crunched under my boots as I followed what used to be a familiar trail. The deeper I went, the more confused I got. The cold hit me, in patches. One spot would be freezing, and 3 steps later I'd be sweating like it was summer. It didn't make any sense. Sounds played tricks on me too. The snap of a branch right next to me would sound far away, like it was happening down in the valley. But then I'd hear a car engine from town, miles away, so clearly it was like someone was revving it right in my ear. The sun wasn't right either. It shone through the trees at angles that couldn't be real, casting shadows that pointed in different directions at the same time. By noon, I was completely lost on my own property. When I finally found my way back to the cabin, it was almost dark. I checked my watch. I'd left at 9 a.m., and now it was 5 p.m. 8 hours, and I hadn't even made it to the main road. That night I noticed something else. The darkness came earlier than it should have. I checked the almanac. Sunset should have been at 6:42 p.m., but it was pitch black by 6:35. The next night, darkness fell at 6:28, then 6:21, each night 7 minutes earlier than the last. The mountain wasn't just playing tricks on me anymore. It was changing the rules, escalating phenomena. I've always been a light sleeper. You learn that in the army, or you don't survive. So I set up my tape recorder before bed one night, just to see if I was sleepwalking or something. Maybe that would explain the strange things happening. The next morning, I played back the tape. For the first few hours, there was just the sound of me breathing, occasional creaks from the cabin settling. Then around 3 a.m. I heard it, whispering, right next to the microphone. A voice that wasn't mine, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. On the tape, my body never moved. I just kept sleeping while something stood over me, talking into my recorder. The footprints were next. I woke up to fresh snow and decided to check my property line again. As I stepped out onto the virgin snow, I saw them. My own boot prints, the exact pattern of my worn-down soles, leading away from the cabin. But I hadn't been outside yet. They were just there, waiting for me to follow. I tried the radio, hoping to hear another human voice. The battery-powered AM/FM usually picked up a station from Helena, but now it caught nothing but static. Until one afternoon when I heard my own voice coming through the speakers. December 15th, my voice said on the radio. The shadows are moving on their own now. I think they're getting closer to the cabin each night. I dropped the radio, like it had burned me. December 15th was still 3 days away. I hadn't recorded that entry yet. Rex knew something was wrong too. My dog had never been afraid of anything, not even when we got jumped by a black bear last summer. But now he wouldn't go near certain parts of the forest. One day he broke his chain and ran off. I spent hours calling for him, searching everywhere. I found him the next morning by the big pine at the north end of my property. His body was dried out, like all the moisture had been sucked from him. The vet in town later said he looked like he'd been dead for weeks, but he'd only been missing 12 hours. That's when the time slip started happening. I'd go into the shed to get a tool, thinking I'd be gone just a minute or two. When I came back out, the sun would be in a completely different position. Once, I went in at breakfast time and emerged to find stars in the sky. 10 hours gone in what felt like 10 minutes. I was losing time, losing my grip, losing my mind. And winter was just beginning. Psychological breakdown. I started marking trees with bright orange paint, making a trail I could follow between the cabin and the shed, the spring, the woodpile. Simple places I went every day, but the next morning, the marks were all wrong. Some were higher up than I'd painted them, others were on the wrong sides of trees, and a few were on trees I know I never touched. I began counting my steps everywhere. I went. 42 steps from bed to coffee pot, 17 steps to the woodpile, 108 steps to the spring. If I took a different number of steps to get somewhere, I knew something was wrong. I checked my reflection every hour, making a mark in my journal each time. I had to be sure I was still me, that I wasn't changing like everything else on this mountain. Sleep became impossible. When I did drift off, I'd wake up unable to move, seeing dark figures with long, stretched-out arms and legs, watching me from the corners of the room. They never came closer, just stood there, tilting their heads like they were trying to figure me out. The journal became my only way to keep track of reality. But even that betrayed me. I found entries in my handwriting that I had no memory of. Writing. Saw myself chopping wood from the kitchen window today, but I was in the kitchen. The spring water flowed uphill for 3 minutes this morning. They're coming out of the trees now. My own handwriting, my own journal, but not my memories. I started talking to myself just to hear a human voice. But sometimes my voice would overlap with itself, like an echo that starts before the original sound. I'd begin a sentence, and halfway through I'd hear myself finishing it from the other side of the room. I wasn't alone in my head anymore. Maybe I never had been. Not since I came to this mountain. External threats emerge. It was during the worst blizzard of the season that I found the clearing. I'd never seen it before. A perfect circle of open ground with no trees, no rocks, nothing. But bare earth despite the heavy snow all around it. At its center, dead animals, squirrels, rabbits, even a young deer, arranged in a spiral pattern, each one dried out like Rex had been. I backed away, tripping over my own feet in my hurry. To get back to the cabin, that's when I saw the tracks. Human-shaped but too big, the stride too long. They appeared from nowhere in the middle of the fresh snow, went a few yards, then disappeared just as suddenly. Back at the cabin, I grabbed my binoculars and looked out across my property. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. There was a figure by the woodpile, chopping logs. It was me, but I was standing in the cabin, watching through binoculars. The trees started behaving strangely too. Even without wind, they would bend, all at the same time, all pointing toward the same spot, deep in the forest, like they were bowing to something. The waterfall that fed my spring froze in January, like it did every year. But one morning I saw the impossible, ice moving upward, water freezing as it climbed against gravity. Through my binoculars, I kept seeing more versions of myself, one checking the generator, another hiking along the tree line, a third sitting motionless on the porch, staring at the cabin. But I was inside, watching it all happen. Versions of me that couldn't exist. I tried calling for help when the phone lines were still working, but halfway through my conversation with the sheriff, the line went strange. His questions started coming through before I asked mine. Then I heard my own voice on the other end, saying the exact words I was about to speak. I hung up. No one was coming to help me. No one would believe me. I was on my own. Point of no return. The big storm hit in February. 3 feet of snow in a single night, burying everything. The phone line snapped under the weight of ice. My truck hadn't started in weeks anyway. When I popped the hood to check the engine, I found the inside packed with tiny, perfectly stacked pebbles. Thousands of them, arranged in neat little towers, filling every inch of space. I decided to hike out. I packed a bag with food and supplies, enough to get me to town if I walked non-stop. I used my compass, ignored its crazy spinning, and just headed south, where I knew the main road had to be. I walked all day. The forest never ended. When night came, I set up a small camp, convinced I'd be off my property by morning. But when the sun rose, my cabin was in sight exactly where I'd started. I tried again and again, 3 days of hiking, always ending up back where I started. The maps I'd brought from town changed overnight, showing Echo Mountain in places it couldn't possibly be. Some showed it hundreds of miles from its actual location. Others showed it nowhere at all, just blank space where my property should have been. The inside of my cabin started to feel wrong too. Rooms that had always been cozy now stretched out longer than they should. I measured the living room one morning, 15 feet across. That evening, it was 18 feet. By the next morning, 23. But from the outside, the cabin looked exactly the same. Size. I was trapped. The mountain had me now, and it was closing in. March came, but spring didn't follow. The snow got deeper, the nights longer. I spent days searching through old papers I found in a forgotten drawer. Surveys, reports, letters from previous owners. Most were water-damaged or faded, but one caught my eye. It was a yellowed report from 1932, when the government sent scientists to study Echo Mountain. They called it an acoustic anomaly, a place where sound didn't work right. They wrote about echoes that came back changed, with extra words no one had spoken. The mountain answers back, one scientist wrote. It learns from what it hears, then adds its own voice. I was reading this by candlelight when I heard something moving on the porch. Not the heavy tread of a bear or the light steps of a deer. Something that dragged itself, leaving wet sounds on the wooden boards. I grabbed my rifle and eased toward the window. What I saw out there, I still have trouble believing it was real. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, shaped like a person, but wrong in every way. Its skin was see-through, like cloudy plastic, showing organs that weren't human. Where its throat should be, I saw 3 or 4 extra voice boxes pulsing with dark fluid. Its arms and legs were too long, joints bending in extra places. As I watched, frozen in fear, it turned its head, too far, farther than a neck should bend. It looked right at me with eyes that had no color. Then it opened its mouth, stretched impossibly wide, and vomited a thick fog that spread across my porch. Where the fog touched the wood, things happened. The boards aged and rotted, then looked new again. A bird flew through it, and I saw the same bird in 5 different places at once. Flying, landing, taking off again, all at the same time. I knew then what I was seeing. The locals had a name for it, the mimic. But this wasn't some backwoods legend. This was real, standing on my porch, wearing a body that mocked human shape, and it wasn't alone. Survival attempts. I'd kept some equipment from my military days, things I wasn't supposed to have. Signal jammers, specialized audio equipment we'd used in Vietnam for operations I still can't talk about. I dug them out from under the floorboards and got to work. I created dead zones around the cabin, places where sound couldn't travel. The mimics used echoes to move, to hunt. If they couldn't hear, maybe they couldn't find me. Through trial and error, I discovered they hated certain sounds. High-pitched tones at just the right frequency made them writhe and retreat. I set up speakers at key points around the property, powered by my failing generator. Then I found the bunker. It was hidden behind a false wall in the root cellar, a heavy metal door I'd never noticed before. Inside, I found a room lined with filing cabinets, recording equipment, and maps covered in notes. The previous owner, a man named Harland who disappeared in 1967, had been studying the mimics for decades. His notes were detailed and terrifying. The creatures weren't just copying sounds, they were copying time itself. They existed in multiple moments at once, which explained why I kept seeing different versions of myself. Those weren't copies. They were me, from different points in time, all visible at once, because the normal flow of time on the mountain was breaking down. Harland had tracked the spread of the infestation. It started small, just a few mimics in the 1920s. By the 1960s, there were dozens. His last entry, dated the day before he vanished, estimated over 100. The worst part was learning what happened to the missing people. The mimics didn't just kill them, they extracted them from time completely, leaving behind echoes, fragments of people that repeated the same actions over and over. The voice I'd heard calling my name, it wasn't Sarah. It was just an echo of my memory of her pulled out of my mind and played back. I wasn't fighting monsters, I was fighting time itself. Reality breakdown. By April, reality was coming apart at the seams. Gravity stopped working right. Water would flow sideways, or objects would float for a few seconds before crashing down. One morning, I woke up on the ceiling, my bed and everything else still on the floor. I started meeting myself, not just seeing other versions through binoculars, but actually running into them face to face. A version of me with a badly broken arm told me to barricade the shed. Another, with burns covering half his face, warned me not to try burning the mimics. Each one had tried something different. Each one had failed. We're caught in a loop, one version explained, his eyes wild with fear and lack of sleep. I'm you from next week. You won't listen. You never listen. Then he walked into the woods and disappeared. Time itself became scrambled. I'd wake up to daylight, eat breakfast, and step outside to find it was the middle of the night. The seasons flashed by in hours, snow melting, flowers bursting through the ground, leaves turning brown, all in a single day. The cabin walls would sometimes turn transparent, or my hand would pass right through solid wood. I'd reach for a cup, and my fingers would sink into it like it was made of fog. The scariest part was my memories. They kept changing, rearranging. I remembered coming to the mountain with Sarah, even though she died before I bought this place. I remembered living here for 20 years, even though I'd only been here for months. I remembered dying here, over and over, in dozens of different ways. I found a calendar in the kitchen with days crossed off, going back to 1978, all in my handwriting. But it was only 1979 now. According to the calendar, I'd been living the same, year over and over. I realized then that I wasn't fighting to escape anymore. I was fighting to break a cycle that had trapped me for longer than I knew. Final confrontation. It was Harland's notes that finally showed me the truth. Hidden in his rambling final pages was a revelation that chilled me to the bone. Echo Mountain wasn't just home to the mimics. It was a mimic, a massive, ancient entity that had been feeding on time for centuries. The mountain itself was alive. The mimics were just its organs, its eyes and ears sent out to harvest more time for it to consume. The government knew. That reconnaissance mission in Vietnam hadn't been about the war at all. We'd been sent to investigate reports of similar creatures in the jungle. They'd been testing us, seeing how humans responded to time distortion. I was never sent to Echo Mountain by accident. I'd been guided here, another test subject in a decades-long experiment. As the truth sank in, my cabin began to shake. The walls bent inward, the ceiling stretched up into darkness. Outside, the forest was gone, replaced by a pulsing landscape of transparent flesh and too many eyes. The versions of me that I'd been seeing, they weren't from different points in a repeating timeline. They were failed attempts. Each one had discovered this truth and tried to fight back. Each one had died. Their bodies were gone, consumed, but their moments of realization were so powerful that they echoed across time, trying to warn the next version of me. I understood what I had to do. The mountain entity fed on divided time, on moments split and stretched across multiple possibilities. The only way to hurt it was to collapse all those possibilities into a single point. I gathered every piece of equipment I had left. The signal jammers, the speakers, the recording devices. I set them up in a precise pattern that Harland had sketched, but never implemented. It created a feedback loop, picking up the mountain's own echoes and amplifying them, feeding them back into the entity itself. The cabin walls melted away completely. I stood face to face with the true form of the mountain, a writhing mass of translucent tissue, countless throats opening and closing, a million eyes blinking in unison. The mimics crawled across its surface like white blood cells, screeching, in voices that sounded horribly like my own. I knew I wouldn't survive. None of my versions ever had, but maybe this time I could end it for good. I turned on the equipment and the air itself seemed to catch fire. Sound became visible, waves of pressure that cut through the entity like knives. Time began to collapse, all the fragmented pieces rushing together. I saw all my deaths at once, hanging from a rope in the living room, frozen in the snow, torn apart by mimics, starved in the bunker. I saw Sarah alive again, then gone. I saw myself buying the cabin over and over and over. As consciousness faded, I felt time compressing around me, crushing me into a single point of existence. The mountain screamed with 1,000 voices, mine, Sarah's, Harland's, all the people it had taken over the years. Then everything went silent. I don't know if I'm dead. I don't think death works quite the way we think it does. I exist now as fragments, pieces of consciousness scattered across Echo Mountain. Sometimes I'm in the trees, sometimes in the rocks, sometimes in the air itself. I have no body, only awareness. I can see things clearly now. The explosion of time collapsing destroyed much of the mountain entity, but not all of it. It's wounded, sleeping, slowly healing deep under the ground. The adult mimics died, but their young survived. Tiny, transparent things hiding in the shadows, feeding on the scraps of time that still leak from the wounded mountain. They're growing stronger, spreading to other peaks. I try to warn people away. When hikers or hunters pass through, I whisper in their ears, try to turn them back. Mostly they just shiver and say, it's the mountain echo. Last week, a truck came up the old dirt road. A man got out, surveyed the ruins of my cabin and smiled. A contractor followed, talking about rebuilding. They stood on the spot where I died, planning a new home. I screamed at them to leave. The contractor looked around nervously. Did you hear that? He asked. The new owner laughed. Just the mountain echo, he said. Nothing to worry about. As they left, I felt movement beneath the ground. The mountain entity stirred in its sleep, hungry after its long recovery. The baby mimics emerged from the trees, tracking the men with colorless eyes. I try to warn them, but I'm just an echo now, and echoes can't save anyone. They never could. I still remember the day I found my grandfather's journal. The leather was cracked and the pages yellow, but his words were as clear as if he'd just written them. That's when everything changed. That's when I started to understand why no one would talk about my family's land. My name is Elijah Morgan. I'm 58 years old and thought I knew everything there was to know about farming. Turns out I didn't know the first thing about what can live in the soil. After my heart attack last spring, the doctors told me to find somewhere quiet to retire. When I learned I'd inherited my grandfather's old property in Oklahoma, it seemed like perfect timing. 120 acres of land that hadn't been worked in decades, a Victorian farmhouse that needed some love, and all the peace and quiet a man could want. Too much quiet, as it turned out. I arrived in June 1957, driving my old pickup, down roads I barely remembered from childhood summers. The neighboring farms looked normal enough. Green fields, healthy cattle, children playing in yards. But as I turned onto the long dirt drive leading to my grandfather's, no, my property now, something felt wrong. The air changed. The birdsong stopped, and though the sky stayed clear, it felt like driving into shadow. Probably just nerves, I told myself, gripping the steering wheel tighter. New beginnings and all that. The house stood just like I remembered. 2 stories of weathered wood and peeling paint, with a wraparound porch and too many windows. Behind it stretched fields that should have been overgrown, but weren't. They looked waiting. As I stepped out of my truck, the first thing I noticed was the temperature. It had been a scorching 95 degrees in town, but here it felt mild, pleasant even. I checked my watch, 3:17 p.m., and looked up at the sun. Something about its light seemed wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Home sweet home, I muttered, grabbing my suitcase. The house key turned easily in the lock, which was strange for a place abandoned for decades. Inside, dust covered everything, but less than there should have been. I walked through rooms filled with forgotten furniture and faded photographs. My boots left prints on the floor that seemed to fill back in when I wasn't looking directly at them. That night, I slept in my grandfather's old bedroom, too tired from the drive to worry about the sheets that smelled surprisingly fresh. I dreamed of digging my hands into dark soil that pulsed like it had a heartbeat. I woke to the sound of something scratching beneath the floorboards. Just mice, I told myself, but mice don't scratch in rhythm. The next morning, I explored the property. The well behind the house still had water, clear and cold. I took a sample in a mason jar to test later. The old barn leaned to one side, but stood sturdy enough. Inside, I found farm equipment that looked recently oiled, despite decades of disuse. Near the dried creek bed, I discovered the first of the rock formations. Flat stones stacked in ways that couldn't be natural, forming shapes that hurt my eyes if I looked at them too long. I told myself they were probably made by local kids playing pranks, but deep down, I knew better. I remembered these formations from my childhood. I remembered being warned never to touch them. Back at the house, I started cleaning, working my way through rooms thick with memories. In the study, behind a bookshelf that moved too easily, I found a hidden compartment containing my grandfather's journal. The first entry was dated 1897. The last, 1913, the year he disappeared. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch as the sun set. Something wasn't right about that either. The shadows stretched in directions that didn't match the sun's position. I cracked open the journal and began to read. "There is something hungry in the ground," my grandfather had written. "Something that grazes upon fear as cattle graze upon grass, and I believe it has developed a taste for our family. I should have left that night, packed my bags and never looked back. But where would I go? My son Thomas wouldn't speak to me since our fight about selling the family business. I had nowhere else, And this land, strange as it might be, was mine. Besides, I told myself, these were just the ramblings of an old man driven crazy by isolation. Nothing more. I was wrong. The first week passed quietly enough. I fixed what I could in the house, cleared some land, and planned where I'd plant come spring. The local hardware store owner eyed me strangely when I mentioned the Morgan property, but he sold me supplies without comment. It was the animals that first made me truly uneasy. Hendricks, who owned the farm to the west, had cattle that grazed right up to our shared fence line but would not cross it, not even when fresh grass waited on my side. When I walked the perimeter, I noticed other things. No animal tracks on my property, no birds nesting in the trees, not even insects buzzing around the wildflowers that grew in. One evening, as sunset painted the sky red, I decided to test the well water. The sample I'd taken days earlier had been sitting in the kitchen. When I checked it, I nearly dropped the jar in shock. Floating in the water was something that looked like a seedling, but no plant I'd ever seen grows tendrils that press against glass as if searching for a way out. Curiosity got the better of me. I poured the water and the strange seedling into a small patch of tilled soil near the house. By morning, it had grown into a vegetable-like thing with pale green skin. I picked it, cut it open on the kitchen table, and found flesh inside that. Looked more like meat than plant matter. When I touched it, my fingertip went numb. That same day, I found the root cellar. The heavy doors had been hidden under a growth of thorny vines that parted easily at my touch, as if inviting me in. Stone. Steps led down into darkness that my lantern couldn't fully penetrate. At the bottom, arranged in a perfect circle, were dozens of animal skeletons. Cattle mostly, but some too strange to identify. All faced inward towards a center point where the dirt floor dipped into a shallow depression. I backed up the stairs, heart pounding in my chest. My doctor had warned against excitement, but how could I stay calm? Something was deeply wrong with this place, something I was starting to remember from childhood. A memory surfaced, hazy, half-formed. Looking down into the well as a boy, seeing something looking back, not my reflection, something else. I returned to my grandfather's journal that night, reading more carefully. He wrote of soil herders and those that walk the pasture on legs that should not be. He described temperature changes, strange growth patterns, and shadows that moved against the light, the same things I was experiencing now. The final pages detailed his attempts to understand what lived beneath our land. He wrote of digging, always digging, driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain. His handwriting grew increasingly erratic, the words sometimes trailing off mid-sentence, only to resume with descriptions of dreams where he burrowed through earth, like them. The last entry simply read, "They are coming up tonight. They know I've learned too much. If anyone finds this, run. The Morgan land remembers what it's owed." That night, I dreamed again of digging, of pushing through soil that welcomed me like an old friend. But this time, I wasn't alone in the earth. Something moved beside me, something large that scraped against stone with too many legs. I tried to turn, to see it, but could only catch glimpses of pale, stretched skin and eyes that reflected no light. I woke, gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat despite the room's perfect 72-degree temperature. As I caught my breath, I realized my hands were caked with dirt, my fingernails torn and bleeding. I hadn't been dreaming of digging. I had been digging. The next morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at the dirt under my fingernails. No matter how hard I scrubbed, I couldn't get it all out. It was as if the soil had become part of me. I decided to plant a small garden, thinking normal farm work might help clear my head. I picked a sunny spot near the house and turned the earth with a shovel. The soil broke easily, almost eagerly, like it wanted to be disturbed. It was dark and rich, not what you'd expect from land that had seen 40 years of drought. At least, Something's normal around here, I muttered to myself, but it wasn't normal. Not at all. I planted tomatoes, carrots and corn that day. Seeds that should have taken weeks to sprout. When I woke the next morning and looked out my kitchen window, I dropped my coffee mug on the floor. My garden was full of plants. Not seedlings, but full-grown plants, heavy with vegetables ready for picking. I approached slowly, afraid to touch them. The tomatoes were deep red, the carrots long and orange, but there was something wrong with their shapes. They were twisted, with bumps and curves where they should be smooth. I picked a tomato and cut it open. Inside was something that looked like raw meat. I threw it all away, digging up every plant and burying them deep behind the barn. But for days after, I swear I could hear them growing underground, pushing up against the dirt. The weather got stranger. Town was suffering the worst drought in years, but dark clouds always seemed to hover over my land without ever dropping rain. The ground stayed moist, almost wet in some places, even as nearby farms dried up and cracked in the heat. One morning, I found a perfect footprint in the dirt near the well. Not mine. This was barefoot, but too big to be human. 5 toes, but each one looked more like a finger, long and jointed. I watched in shock as the print slowly filled itself in, the soil moving on its own until no trace remained. That same day, I noticed my boots had changed. I'd left them by the door the night before, and now strange patterns had been etched into the leather, swirling designs that reminded me of the tunnel patterns ants make in those glass ant farms. Tried calling the only friend I had left, Bill Johnson from my old cattle business. The phone rang, but when he picked up, all I could hear was a wet smacking sound, like something chewing. I hung up quickly. My dreams got worse. Every night I'd feel myself sinking into the earth, but now I wasn't just moving through it. I was seeing through different eyes. Low to the ground, everything tinted red, watching myself sleep from outside my bedroom window. I'd wake up with dirt in my mouth, my ears, even packed under my eyelids. I started finding small holes in the yard each morning, perfectly round and 6 inches across. They were always filled in by afternoon, as if they'd never been there. My appetite changed too. Regular food didn't satisfy me anymore. I'd eat a full meal and still feel hungry, not in my stomach, but deeper somehow. A hunger that gnawed at me from the inside out. Then I found the specimens. I was looking for some tools in the barn when I discovered a hidden trapdoor beneath a stack of old hay. It led to a small room lined with shelves. On them were dozens of jars filled with cloudy liquid. Floating in each was something that looked almost like a baby cow, but wrong. Their legs were too long, joints in the wrong places. Some had extra limbs sprouting from their backs. Others had no eyes, just smooth skin where eyes should be. "What were you doing, Grandpa?" I whispered, the jars seeming to follow my movement. As I backed away, that night I heard it for the first time. A low rumble coming from deep underground, like a giant beast purring in its sleep. The whole house vibrated slightly, just enough to make the hanging pictures tilt and the water in. My glass ripple. I knew I should leave. Pack up and go. Property be damned. But every time I thought about leaving, a fog would settle over my mind, and I'd find myself drifting to the window instead, staring out at the fields with a longing I couldn't explain. Besides, where would I go? The drought had ruined most farms around. At least my land had water. At least here things grew. By the end of the second week, I couldn't ignore the changes in my own body. My joints ached when I got too far from the house, like something was pulling me back. I found myself pressing my hands against the ground for no reason, feeling comfort from the contact. My skin grew pale despite the hours I spent outside. And sometimes, when I wasn't paying attention, I could swear my shadow moved differently than I did. I tried digging at the spot where all those animal skeletons pointed in the root cellar. I got about 3 feet down when my shovel hit something. Not rock, metal. I cleared away the dirt to find a trapdoor with a heavy iron ring. I was about to pull it open when I heard a sound that froze me solid. From behind the barn, came a steady clicking like hard nails on wood and a dragging sound. I left the shovel and crept toward the noise, staying low. What I saw there still haunts me. It looked almost like a cow at first glance, but standing on legs that were all wrong, too long, too thin, with too many joints. It moved like a spider, picking its way carefully across the yard. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over bones that pushed against it from the inside. Where its head should have been was something closer to a deer skull, but with teeth that didn't belong in any herbivore's mouth. It stopped suddenly and turned toward me, though it had no eyes that I could see. It stood perfectly still, its chest barely moving with shallow breaths. Then it took a step toward me. I ran back to the house, slamming the door behind me. Through the window, I watched the creature approach the spot where I'd been digging. It lowered its head to the hole and then impossibly began to sink into the ground. Not digging, not breaking the surface, just sinking as if the solid earth had turned to water. In seconds, it was gone, leaving no trace. After that, I started, seeing them more often, the pasture walkers, as my grandfather had called them in his journal. Always at dusk or dawn, always near the spots where the ground felt softer underfoot. They never came close to the house, but they watched. I could feel their attention on me even when I couldn't see them. I tried to leave once, packed my truck, and headed down the driveway. I made it halfway before the ground beneath my tires suddenly turned soft as quicksand. The truck sank up to its axles in seconds, the earth closing around it like hungry jaws. I barely made it out before it disappeared, completely. That night, I got my first letter from my son Thomas in over 2 years. He wrote that he'd been having strange dreams about me, about the old family property. Said he felt like I was in trouble and that he was coming to visit. I sat down immediately, to write back, to warn him to stay away, but my hands wouldn't cooperate. Instead, I found myself writing, "Come soon, son. It's beautiful here. The land remembers you." I tried to tear up the letter, but my fingers wouldn't obey. I watched helplessly as my own hands folded it neatly, placed it in an envelope, and walked it to the mailbox. Something was taking control, and I was running out of time. I woke one morning to find I'd dug again in my sleep, but this time it wasn't just random holes. I'd excavated a perfect circle in the front yard, 10 feet across and 3 feet deep. At the center was a patch of ground that looked almost polished, like it had been rubbed smooth. I touched it and felt a jolt run up my arm. The ground was warm and seemed to pulse under my fingers. When I pressed harder, it gave slightly, like pressing on a blister. That same day, I discovered the tunnels. I was checking the root cellar again when I noticed a new opening in the wall, perfectly round and large enough to crawl through. I shouldn't have done it, but curiosity pushed me forward. I grabbed my lantern and entered on hands and knees. The tunnel was smooth and dry, curving gently downward. After about 20 feet, it opened into a larger space where I could stand. What I saw there made no sense. The walls weren't dirt, but something like flesh, pale and veined, pulsing slightly in my lantern light. The floor was firm, but seemed to give under my weight, adjusting to my steps. Branching off from this chamber were dozens of other tunnels, some as small as my fist, others large enough to drive a car through. And on the walls, scratched into that fleshy surface, were symbols matching the patterns on my boots, on the metal objects I'd left in the yard. Patterns I now realized were a form of writing. The air was thick and warm, smelling of wet earth and something else, something metallic, like blood. I heard movement in one of the larger tunnels, the scrape of something heavy being dragged. I turned to leave and realized the tunnel I'd come through had closed. In its place was smooth wall, with no sign there had ever been an opening. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give out right there. Then I heard whispering, dozens of voices speaking too softly to understand. Among them I recognized one, my grandfather saying my name over and over. "Elijah, join us in the deep places. Elijah, the soil needs a Morgan. Elijah, a new tunnel opened to my right, darkness beyond it. Something moved in that darkness. Many somethings coming closer. I ran to the wall where my tunnel had been and clawed at it desperately. To my shock, it tore like paper, revealing dirt beyond. I dug frantically, the wall heeling behind my hands as I tunneled upward. Soil filled my mouth, my nose, but I kept digging, fighting the rising panic. I broke through into the root cellar just as I felt something grab at my ankle. I kicked free and scrambled up the stairs, slamming the cellar doors behind me. Through the wooden slats, I heard a low moan of disappointment from below. That night, I barricaded myself in the upstairs bathroom, the only room in the house with no direct contact with the ground. I filled the tub with water and sat in it fully clothed, reasoning that whatever lived in the earth couldn't reach me through water. I was wrong again. The water in the tub began to darken around 3 a.m., soil particles rising from nowhere, swirling into patterns before my eyes. By dawn, I was sitting in mud that formed hands that caressed my arms with terrible gentleness. 3 days later, my son Thomas arrived. I was sitting on the porch steps, staring at the strange shadows cast by nothing, when his car came up the drive. He looked older than his 30 years, worn down by worry and the long drive. "Dad," he called, approaching cautiously. "Are you okay? You don't look well." I tried to warn him, I really did, but what came out was, "It's so good to see you, son. The land has been waiting for you." Thomas frowned, setting down his suitcase. "What do you mean?" I felt my mouth smile. "Without my permission. Family land needs family blood. Always has." He took a step back, eyes widening as he took in my appearance, the dirt-caked clothes, the pale skin, the way I sat too still. "Dad, you're scaring me. What's going on here?" Behind him I saw the ground ripple slightly, like something large was moving just beneath the surface. "Nothing to worry about," I heard myself say. "You must be hungry after your drive. Come inside. There's food waiting." And there was, though I didn't remember preparing it. Vegetables from a garden I'd destroyed days ago, arranged neatly on plates. All of them wrong, colors too bright, shapes too perfect. As Thomas stepped onto the porch, I felt the house shudder slightly in anticipation. Something had been waiting for him, waiting for both of us. The Morgan men, finally home. The door swung open on its own, inviting us in. Dinner with Thomas was the strangest meal of my life. We sat across from each other at my grandfather's old oak table, not touching the food that seemed to pulse slightly on our plates. Outside the sun was setting, but the shadows in the room moved like they were cast by a different light source. "Dad," Thomas said carefully, "I think we should leave. Tonight. Something's not right here." I wanted to agree, to grab him and run for the car, but my mouth had other ideas. "We can't leave," I heard myself say. "The land needs us. The burrower is hungry." Thomas's face went pale. "The what?" My hand reached across the table of its own accord and grabbed his wrist. My grip was stronger than it should have been, my fingers digging into his skin. "Dad, you're hurting me," he said, trying to pull away. Suddenly, the house shook. Not like an earthquake, more like something huge had shifted beneath the foundation. A low moan rose from the floorboards, and the lights flickered. That shock broke whatever hold the thing had on me, at least for a moment. I yanked my hand back and jumped. "To my feet! Run!" I gasped, my voice my own again. "Thomas, run now!" The floor between us split with a terrible cracking sound. Dark soil bubbled up from the crack, and with it came a smell like rotten meat and fresh-turned earth. We both bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before we could reach it. The windows followed, shutters slamming closed as if blown by a strong wind. The house was sealing us in. "The cellar," I shouted, grabbing Thomas's arm. "There's another way out through the tunnels." It was a desperate gamble, but our only chance. We ran to the cellar doors, which swung open eagerly at our approach. Too eagerly. The steps down were no longer wood, but something soft that squelched under our feet. The walls glistened in the fading light, wet and moving slightly, like they were breathing. "What is this place?" Thomas whispered, pressing close to me as we descended. It's changing, I said. The whole property is changing. I think it's been waiting for this moment for a long time. At the bottom of the steps, where the root cellar should have been, we found a vast chamber that couldn't possibly fit under. The house. The ceiling rose at least 30 feet above us, supported by columns that looked like massive tree trunks, but pulsed with a life that no tree possesses. The floor was covered in a carpet of what looked like grass, but moved against our feet, thousands of tiny tendrils trying to take hold of our shoes. And everywhere, those strange symbols glowed with a dim light, carved into the walls, the columns, even the floor. "Dad," Thomas said, his voice shaking. "What is that?" He pointed to the center of the chamber, where the floor dipped into a wide pit. Something moved in that darkness, something enormous. As we watched, the ground at the center began to bulge upward, soil and rock falling away as something pushed from below. A massive shape emerged, pale, glistening, and horribly familiar. It looked like an earthworm the size of a whale, but with features that had no place on any worm. Its front end opened into a mouth ringed with teeth that looked disturbingly human. Along its body were stunted limbs, dozens of them, ending in hooves and claws and things that resembled human hands. "The Burrower," I whispered, the name coming to me from some buried memory or from the thing itself, pushing the knowledge into my mind. The creature raised what passed for its head, the mouth opening and closing as it tasted the air. It had no eyes that I could see, but I knew it was looking at us, looking at Thomas especially. "It's been growing down here for generations," I said, the knowledge flowing into me from the walls, the floor, the air itself. "My grandfather found it. It was smaller then. He tried to understand it, to control it, but it controlled him instead." "What does it want?" Thomas asked, backing away slowly. "Food, fear." I felt the answer bubble up from somewhere outside myself. "And the Morgan bloodline. There's something in our family it needs, a chemical in our fear response. That's why it kept grandfather alive all these years. That's why it called me back." The massive worm thing undulated, its body rippling as it moved toward us. The ground beneath it liquefied, allowing it to swim through solid earth as easily as water. Thomas turned to run, but the entrance we'd come through was gone, replaced by smooth wall. "How do we get out of here?" he shouted. I spotted a tunnel to our right that glowed slightly brighter than the others. "There! That might lead to the surface." We ran, the floor rippling beneath us like we were running on a waterbed. Behind us, the burrower gave chase, its massive body tearing through the earth with frightening speed. The tunnel sloped upward, which gave me hope. It narrowed as we ran, forcing us to crouch, then crawl. The walls pressed in on all sides, warm and yielding like flesh. "It's closing behind us," Thomas yelled. I looked back to see the tunnel sealing itself, the opening shrinking like a healing wound. Ahead, a pinprick of daylight. We clawed our way toward it desperately. The air grew fresher, the soil drier. We were nearly there. Then something grabbed my ankle. I looked down to see the soil itself formed into a hand, clutching me with terrible strength. More hands emerged, grabbing at my legs, my waist, trying to pull me back. "Keep going!" I shouted to Thomas, who had reached the opening. "Get out!" Thomas turned back, his face a mask of fear and determination. "I'm not leaving you!" He grabbed my arms and pulled while I kicked at the earthen hands. For a moment it was a tug of war between my son and the living soil. Then, with a final heave, Thomas pulled me free and we tumbled out onto the surface. We were near the old well in a part of the property I hadn't explored. The sun was setting, painting the sky blood red. The air felt thin after the heavy atmosphere underground. "We need to get to the car," Thomas gasped, helping me to my feet. But as we took our first steps, the ground around us began to move. Tunnels opened in dozens of places, and from them emerged the pasture walkers, those terrible cattle things, surrounding us in a wide circle. There had to be at least 20 of them, their eyeless heads all turned toward us. Behind them, The soil bulged and split as the burrower itself rose partly to the surface, its massive body creating a ridge in the earth, like a giant mole tunnel. Its mouth, that terrible ring of human teeth, broke through the surface, opening wide in what might have been a smile. "There's no escape," I said, the knowledge coming from the thing itself. "It's been waiting for us, for both of us, the last of the Morgan line." The pasture walkers began to close in, their many jointed legs clicking on the hard ground. Though they had no eyes, I could feel their hunger. They were extensions of the burrower, its shepherds and servants. "Wait," Thomas said suddenly. Well, what about it? Grandfather's journal. You told me on the phone he wrote about the well water affecting the creature." I hadn't told him any such thing. I hadn't spoken to Thomas on the phone at all, but somehow he knew. "The chemicals in the water," Thomas continued urgently. "They're toxic to it. That's why the water tasted like ash when you drank it. It's contaminated with something that hurts the burrower." As if in confirmation, the great worm thing let out a moan that shook the earth beneath our feet. The pasture walkers hesitated in their advance. We backed toward the well, the circle of creatures following cautiously. "If we can flood the tunnels," I said, the plan forming as I spoke. "It might drive it deeper underground, maybe trap it." Thomas nodded. "But how?" "The well pump is broken." I looked up. Dark clouds had gathered overhead, the same clouds that had hovered over the property for weeks without releasing rain. "We don't need a pump," I said. "We need to make it rain." In my grandfather's journal, he'd written about the creature's control over the local weather, how it kept rain away to prevent the well water from reaching its deeper chambers. If we could reverse that somehow. I closed my eyes and reached out with my mind, searching for the connection I'd felt growing between myself and the land. It was there, a tenuous link to the creature below, to the soil itself. Through that link I could feel its thoughts, alien and cold but clear in their purpose. It was keeping the rain at bay through sheer force of will, so I pushed back. I visualized the clouds opening, water falling, soaking into the ground. I pushed this image through the link between us, feeling the creature's surprise, then resistance. My head felt like it would split open. Blood ran from my nose, my ears. The pressure was enormous. "Thomas," I gasped. "The well, open it." Thomas ran to the well and threw back the wooden cover. The darkness below seemed to go on forever. The burrower sensed what we were doing. It roared, a sound that came not from its mouth but from the earth itself. The pasture walkers charged. With a final, desperate push of will, I broke through the creature's mental barrier. Above us, the clouds burst. Rain fell in sheets, harder than any natural downpour, straight down into the open well and soaking the ground around us. The effect was immediate and terrible. The pasture walkers screamed, high, piercing sounds that cut through the roar of the rain. Their skin smoked where the water touched it, melting away to reveal something underneath that was neither flesh nor bone. The ground began to shake violently. Cracks opened in the earth, steam rising from the depths. The burrower thrashed, its massive body creating waves in the soil like a sea serpent breaking the surface. "It's working!" Thomas shouted over the storm. But our victory was short-lived. Even as the creature writhed in pain, I felt something changing in my own body. My skin burned where the rain touched it. My insides twisted with the same agony the burrower felt. "Thomas," I said, my voice hardly recognizable. "Something's wrong." He turned to look at me, horror dawning on his face. "Dad, your skin." I looked down at my hands. The rain was washing away something like a film, revealing skin beneath that was not skin at all, but the same pale, veined substance as the tunnel. "Walls. It's been changing me," I said, understanding at last. "All this time, replacing parts of me with itself." The truth crashed over me like the rain. I wasn't fighting the burrower. I was becoming it, or rather, a part of it. Just like my grandfather before me. In that moment, in the cold rain that burned like acid, I saw him, my grandfather, not as the man in the photographs, But as he was now, a consciousness spread thin throughout the soil of the property, absorbed into the greater being that was the burrower, yet still somehow himself, still aware, still suffering. And I saw what would happen to me, to Thomas, to anyone with Morgan blood who set foot on this land. Thomas, I said, fighting to keep my mind, clear as parts of me dissolved in the rain, you have to leave now, while it's weakened. I can't leave you like this. You have to. I pushed him toward the property line, still visible where the healthy grass of the neighboring farm met our sickly soil. Go. Don't come back. Sell the land, abandon it, burn it. I don't care. But never return. Thomas hesitated, tears mixing with the rain on his face. Go, I shouted, using the last of my strength to push him away. He ran, stumbling through the mud toward the boundary. The pasture walkers tried to follow but collapsed, their limbs dissolving in the downpour. As Thomas crossed the property line, I felt the burrower's rage. It dove deeper, retreating from the poisoned surface. The ground beneath me collapsed, and I fell into darkness. I didn't die. I wish I had. I'm still here in the soil of Morganland, not as a man anymore. That body is long gone, but as something else. A consciousness spread throughout the property, feeling every raindrop, every footstep, every root that pushes through the dirt. Thomas never came back. He did as I asked, abandoned the property to state ownership after declaring me missing. For years, no one came here. But today, something changed. A car pulled up the long-neglected driveway. A family, mother, father, 3 children. They're walking the property now, the parents pointing out the old house, the overgrown fields, talking about renovations and fresh starts. I try to warn them. I make the soil shift under their feet, form shadows where there should be none. But they interpret these as quirks of the land, signs of character. Look how fertile the soil is, the father says, crumbling some between his fingers. Nothing's been planted here for decades, but it's rich as anything. Rich with the remains of my body, with the bodies of all those the burrower has consumed over generations. The youngest child, a girl of about 7, stops suddenly near the old well. She tilts her head as if listening. Someone's crying, she says, under the ground. Her parents laugh it off, but she continues to listen. And for a moment, I think she hears me, really hears me, as I try to scream without a mouth, without lungs, with nothing but the vibration of soil particles. The burrower is still here, sleeping deep below where the rain can't reach. It's weaker now, but healing slowly, waiting. When these people settle here, it will begin again. The subtle changes, the strange dreams, the compulsion to dig. The family walks back to their car, talking excitedly about their plans. The father has papers in his hand, property deeds, I imagine. They're going to buy the forgotten pasture. As they drive away, I gather what little strength I have. I make the soil near the driveway entrance form words, just for a moment, just long enough to be seen. Run away, but a sudden breeze blows across the surface, erasing my warning before they can see it. The burrower stirs in its sleep, pleased. The family will return, the cycle will begin again, and I will be here trapped between consciousness and soil for as long as the land remembers what it's owed. The lighthouse called to me before I ever saw it. I dream of its beam cutting through fog, a promise of safety that felt like a lie. I should have listened to that feeling. My name is Jackson Miller. 3 months ago, I bought an abandoned lighthouse, Keeper's Cottage, on a forgotten island off the coast of Georgia. Now I know why it was so cheap. Now I know why the locals call it Skin Island in whispers, but by then it was already too late. I was desperate when I came here. My life had fallen apart after I blew the whistle on coastal chemicals dumping. Toxic waste into protected marshlands. They destroyed me for it, planted false evidence, turned colleagues against me, even made up stories about drinking on research vessels. After 22 years as a marine biologist, suddenly no university would touch me. My wife couldn't handle the stress and left. The divorce papers arrived the same week as my final rejection letter. This island was supposed to be my second chance. Surrounded by miles of salt marsh with tides that behave like nothing I've studied before, it seemed perfect for independent research. The cottage needed work, but the previous owner had started renovations before he disappeared. The realtor was vague about that part. "You'll need a boat," she'd said, not meeting my eyes. "It's completely cut off at high tide." What she didn't mention was how the local fishermen refuse to approach the island, how they make the sign of the cross when I mention where I live, or that the island has been unofficially quarantined since a series of biological anomalies in the mid-20th century. I found that out later, in dusty newspaper clippings hidden behind a loose board in the cottage wall. The lighthouse hasn't worked in decades. The lens is gone, and the wiring is shot, but sometimes at night I swear I can see a faint glow at the top. When I climb the spiral stairs to check, it's always dark and empty. Just me and the endless marsh stretching to the horizon, black water reflecting the stars. I found the logbook my first week here. It was hidden in a compartment under the floor, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow kept it dry all these years. The last keeper's entries get stranger as they go. The final one, dated June 17th, 1963, simply reads, "They're walking on the glass again. Higher this time. How can they climb so high? The tide isn't due for hours." I told myself it was the ramblings of a lonely man driven crazy by isolation. That's what I told myself. Then the motion-activated cameras I set up to monitor marsh wildlife started catching something. Large shapes moving through the tall grass at night, where no land animal could possibly walk. The images are always blurry, the movement too fast for the camera's trigger, but something is out there. Something big. Last week during the new moon, the marsh water began to glow. Not the normal bioluminescence from dinoflagellates that I've studied my whole career. This light moved with purpose, flowing against the current in patterns too regular to be natural. I took samples, but by morning they were just ordinary marsh water again. The shells were the next thing. Every morning, perfect spirals of shells appear on the narrow strip of beach near my cottage. Not scattered randomly like normal tide deposits. These are arranged in precise mathematical patterns, Fibonacci sequences that couldn't possibly form naturally. When I collect them for study, they're gone from my sample bags by nightfall, somehow. Return to the beach in new formations. The tides don't follow normal patterns here. They come in when the moon says they should be going out. Sometimes the water rises while I watch, with no wind or storm to explain it. The locals won't talk about it when I ask in town. They just shake their heads and find reasons to be elsewhere. Last night, I heard something new. I was working late, analyzing water samples, when I heard what sounded like wet footsteps on the spiral staircase of the lighthouse. Slow, dragging steps. I grabbed my flashlight and ran over, heart pounding. The stairs were dry, empty, but when I reached the top I found seaweed and marsh mud on the glass, on the outside of the glass, 200 feet above the ground. I know I should leave, pack up my few belongings and go somewhere, anywhere. But there's nowhere left for me in the world. And besides, there's still that part of me, the scientist who has to know, has to understand. Even now, as I write this with shaking hands, I'm planning tomorrow's experiments. The sun is setting. The tide is coming in, 3 hours early according to my charts. And something in the marsh is moving toward my island. I need to understand what's happening here. I need to know what happened to my research assistant, Tom, during that night dive 3 years ago. The dive where he vanished and I heard that horrible sucking sound beneath the water. I've always told myself it was an accident, that the current took him. But now I'm not so sure. Because last night, as the tide came in against all logic and reason, I swear I heard Tom's voice calling from the marsh. And it wasn't alone. I stopped sleeping at night after finding those footprints. They came out of the water. That's what scared me most. Started as webbed marks in the mud, then changed to human feet as they moved up the shore. Like something was transforming as it walked. The water isn't normal anymore. Yesterday I dropped a metal bucket into a tidal pool to collect samples. When I pulled it up 10 minutes later, the bottom was already dissolving, eaten away like acid had touched it. But when I accidentally cut my hand on the jagged edge, I dipped it in the same water to clean it. The cut closed up in seconds, not even leaving a scar. Something's happening to the plants too. The marsh grass moves when there's no wind. At first, I thought I was seeing things, but I set up a time-lapse camera. The footage showed the grass stalks swaying in perfect unison, bending to form patterns that looked almost like writing. I tried to leave last Tuesday, packed my boat with supplies, waited for high tide, and started the engine. I made it halfway across the channel when the water around me went still, dead still, like glass, even though the wind was blowing hard. Then the engine died. When I looked over the side, the water was pulling away from the boat, creating a perfect dry circle around me. I sat there for hours, stranded on suddenly dry land in the middle of what should have been 10 feet of water. When night came, the water rushed back all at once and carried me straight back to the island. The marsh doesn't want me to leave. The birds know something's wrong. At sunset, they fly in shapes I've never seen birds make before. Perfect circles, spirals, once even what looked like letters. They never land on the island anymore, even though it should be perfect habitat. I found something in the lighthouse. Last week, behind a loose brick in the wall was a collection of specimen jars, dozens of them, from the 1950s. Each one contained, I don't know what to call them. Not plants, not animals. Something in between, like someone had combined jellyfish with marsh grass and added parts from crabs and fish. The labels were in handwriting I now recognize from the logbook. The last jar was dated 1 day before the final entry. The dreams started after I found the jars. Every night the same underwater landscape, a city of sorts made from coral and bone and strange glowing structures. I've never seen a place like it. Never even imagined it. But in the dreams, I know every street and building. I belong there. I woke up in the marsh 2 nights ago, standing waist-deep in water 50 yards from shore, with no memory of how I got there. The water felt warm, almost hot, and something was moving against my legs. When I looked down, the water was too dark to see through, but I could feel fingers touching me, tugging gently at my clothes, my skin. I ran back to the cottage and locked the door. That's when I noticed them. Small slits on the sides of my neck that weren't there when I went to bed. They close up during the day, becoming almost invisible, but near water they open again. Like gills, my research equipment is picking up impossible readings, heartbeats in empty water, breathing sounds from inside solid marsh mud. Once, a voice that said my name, recorded when nobody was there but me. I found a dead fox yesterday, perfectly preserved in a tidal pool. It should have been decaying, but it looked like it had been taxidermied, except its eyes were still wet and moving, following me as I circled the pool. I ran back to the cottage and didn't come out until morning. When I checked again, the fox was gone, but the water in that pool has stayed perfectly still ever since, not rippling even in the strongest wind. That's when I saw it for the first time, the marsh walker. I was checking my equipment by the eastern shore when the water began to bulge upward. Something was rising from below, tall, man-shaped, but made entirely of compacted marsh grass, shells, and small writhing sea creatures. It had no face, just a smooth bulge where a head should be, with bits of crab shell and fish scales embedded in the surface. It stood there, water streaming off its body, swaying slightly like it was still part of the marsh. Then it turned toward me, though it had no eyes that I could see, and raised an arm. The arm stretched impossibly long, reaching toward me across 30 feet of beach. I ran. I heard it following, not footsteps, but a wet, slithering sound. When I reached the lighthouse and looked back, it was gone. But the tide was coming in, fast hours ahead of schedule, cutting off the path I'd just taken. That night, I barricaded myself in the lighthouse. Hours later, I heard a voice outside, a fisherman from the mainland calling for help, said his boat had stalled and asked me to come out. It sounded exactly like old Pete from the harbor, except I'd seen Pete in town just 2 days before, and he'd refused to even look at me when I mentioned where I was living. The voice called all night, sometimes as Pete, sometimes as my ex-wife, once even as my mother, who's been dead for 10 years. In the morning, I found 5 of them standing in the shallows. Marsh walkers, all slightly different, one with shells for eyes, another with what looked like a human hand grafted onto its seaweed arm. They didn't move toward me, just stood watching the lighthouse, waiting. The worst part? One of them looked familiar. Something in the way it stood, tilted slightly, to the right. The same way Tom, my research assistant, used to stand when he was thinking hard about something. Last night, I fell asleep at my desk and dreamed I was writing in my journal. When I woke up, there were 3 pages filled with writing. In my handwriting, but in a language I've never seen before. The terrifying thing is, I can read it. Somehow I understand every word, though I don't know how. It describes a place deep under the marsh, a hive or nest of some kind, where the many become one and the one divides again. The storm hit this morning. Not a normal storm. The clouds are only over my island, forming a perfect circle with the lighthouse at the center. The tide has risen higher than I've ever seen, covering all escape routes. My boat was torn from its mooring and dissolved before my eyes, the wood and metal simply melting into the water. I tried calling for help on my radio. The Coast Guard responded and said they were sending a boat. I watched from the lighthouse as it approached the island. It made it within 100 yards before it simply came apart, not violently. The metal and fiberglass separated like wet paper, the pieces sinking quietly into the marsh. I heard the screams of the crew through my radio as they hit the water. Then I saw their heads disappearing beneath the surface, one by one. The island is sinking. I can feel it settling beneath me, inch by inch. The cottage floor, once dry, now has an inch of water even at low tide. The marsh is consuming everything. This morning, I finally understood what's happening to me. The webbing between my fingers is undeniable now, growing more pronounced each day. Patches of my skin have become translucent, showing shadows of organs that don't match human anatomy. When I cut myself yesterday, my blood ran clear for several seconds before turning red. I'm becoming something else, something that belongs to the marsh. And still, I can't bring myself to end it. Some part of me, the scientist that I've always been, needs to understand what's happening here, needs to see this through to the end. The lighthouse is my only hope now. Something about its structure seems to repel the marsh walkers. They won't cross the ring of white stones that surrounds its base. But the stones are disappearing, sinking into the ground one by one. Tonight will bring the highest tide yet. I can feel it coming. The marsh walkers are gathering, more of them each hour, standing in a circle around the lighthouse, waiting for the stones to sink, waiting for me, and deep beneath us all, something is waking up. I'm writing this from the top of the lighthouse. The water has claimed the first floor already. I don't know how much time I have left. Last night, during the highest tide, I finally saw it, the real thing living in the marsh. The marsh walkers aren't separate creatures, they're just fingers, tiny extensions of something massive below. It started when the water rose past the last of the white stones. The marsh walkers didn't attack like I expected. Instead, they joined hands, forming a circle around the lighthouse. Then they began to sink, slowly, until only their seaweed heads were visible above the water. The marsh started bubbling like it was boiling. The water turned black, then clear, then colors I don't have names for. I could see straight down through it, deep beneath the island, and what I saw. Imagine a Portuguese man-of-war jellyfish, but the size of a shopping mall. Imagine it mixed with marsh plants, crabs, fish parts, and human limbs, all pulsing together as one giant organism. Tendrils stretched from it for miles, connecting to every part of the marsh. Some of those tendrils ended in marsh walkers. Others disappeared into the mud, where I'd seen those perfectly preserved animals. They weren't preserved. They were being digested, slowly, kept alive somehow during the process. The thing below us has been here for millions of years. Before dinosaurs, before almost anything. It's been growing, learning, consuming. The island isn't an island at all. It's part of the creature. And we're the fish. I found the hidden lab this morning, behind a false wall in the lighthouse basement. It belonged to the last keeper, Dr. Samuel Harris, according to his notes. He wasn't just a lighthouse keeper, he was a government scientist, sent to study the biological anomalies. By the end, he understood what he was really looking at. His notes explain everything. The creature feeds on knowledge as much as flesh. It absorbs its victims' memories, skills, and knowledge. That's why it targets scientists who come to study the marsh. With each new victim, it gets smarter, learns more about human technology. Harris discovered the thing's weaknesses. Certain electrical frequencies disrupt its nervous system. Specific chemical compounds poison it temporarily. The lighthouse itself was specially designed to emit signals that keep the creature dormant when the light was working. I've spent the day gathering what I need from Harris's lab. Made a protective suit from insulated material he developed. Found his weapons, crude electrical devices designed to shock the water at specific frequencies. But time is running out. The island is sinking faster now. Water behaves differently around the lighthouse, moving up walls, forming tentacles that reach through windows. Twice I've seen it take human shape, mimicking my own face in its watery surface. This morning, I saw the government files Harris kept hidden. The island has been a containment zone since 1943, when the first research team disappeared. They've known all along. They send a new keeper every few years, really a researcher, and wait for them to disappear too. Then they study the data, trying to understand the creature without getting too close. The thing's intelligence is growing. In Harris's time, it could only mimic simple sounds and shapes. Now it creates perfect copies of human voices, faces, memories. It called me on my own phone yesterday, using my mother's voice, knowing things only she would know. The worst part is what's happening to me. My transformation is accelerating. The webbing between my fingers now extends to my elbows. My skin is translucent in patches, revealing new organs beneath, things that pulse with the same rhythm as the marsh tides. I should be terrified, but part of me feels curious, like the scientist I've always been, watching a fascinating experiment unfold. Even if I'm the subject, and time works differently near the water now. I spent what felt like minutes checking readings on a tide gauge, only to return and find 3 days had passed according to my watch. The inside of the lighthouse seems bigger than possible. The spiral staircase takes longer to climb each time, as if space itself is stretching. Last night, I tried one of Harris's weapons, shot electrical pulses into the water where marsh walkers were gathering. They dissolved instantly, but the water itself rose up in their place, forming a wave that nearly battered down the lighthouse door. I hear Tom's voice all the time now, my research assistant who disappeared 3 years ago during that night dive. Sometimes it comes from the wall, sometimes from empty rooms. Last night it came from right beside me in bed, though I was alone. "It's not what you think, Jackson," he whispered. It doesn't kill you, it makes you more. We're all still here, all still thinking, just differently. This morning I found something that changed everything. A hidden recording from Harris, made the day before his final logbook entry. "The government has it wrong," his voice said, crackling with static. "They think it's an organism to be contained. It's not. It's an alternative evolutionary path, one that didn't create individual organisms with separate consciousness, but a distributed awareness throughout an entire ecosystem. It's not malicious, it's just incorporating us into itself, and we, or parts of us, remain conscious within it. I think I understand now. The creature isn't attacking us. It's trying to communicate the only way it can, by making us part of itself. The horror isn't death, but a transformation into something beyond human. The king tide is coming tonight, the highest possible tide combined with a rare alignment of sun, moon, and earth. Harris's notes predicted it would trigger a fruiting event in the organism. The island itself is a fruiting body, preparing to release spores that could spread the organism globally. I've made my decision. I found a way to poison the creature, chemicals, from Harris's lab that could kill it. But I've also found another way, a compound that would accelerate my transformation. Let me join with the organism while potentially keeping some of my human consciousness intact. If I poison it, I destroy something unique in all of Earth's history. If I join it, I might be able to change it from within, maintain some control, keep it from spreading beyond the marsh. The water is rising faster now. It's up to the second floor of the lighthouse. The glass walls of the lamp room are rippling, like they're melting, though they're still solid to my touch. I hear Tom's voice again, clearer now. "It's beautiful in here, Jackson. Scary at first, but beautiful. You don't lose yourself. You become everything, every drop of water, every blade of grass. You experience it all at once." The spores are forming. I can see them developing in the water, tiny capsules like fish eggs, but perfectly geometric, glowing with bioluminescence. By morning, they'll release and ride the ocean currents to new shores. I've made my choice. I'm going to take Harris's compound, become like Tom, join with the marsh. Maybe I can direct it, use my human consciousness to keep it contained here. Create a warning system that will keep others away. The water is at my feet now, swirling around. The top of the lighthouse, it doesn't feel cold anymore. It feels like home. Wait, there's something coming. A boat, no, 3 boats. Research vessels heading toward the island. New scientists, new minds for the marsh to absorb. I'm trying to warn them away, making the water form patterns that any marine biologist would recognize as danger signs. But they're not turning back. They see my signals as fascinating phenomena to study. I need to finish this transformation now, before they land. Need to gain enough control to protect them. The marsh is calling me. The water is rising. Soon I'll step into it and become something new. Something that's both Jackson Miller and the ancient thing beneath the marsh. This is my last entry as a fully human consciousness. If you're reading this, if you've come to study the strange tidal patterns and bioluminescent phenomena around this abandoned lighthouse, turn back now. What you see as beautiful warning signs in the water movements, in the flight patterns of birds, in the arrangement of shells on beaches, those are my attempts to save you. I am the marsh now. I am the tide, and I am still trying to keep you safe from what I've become. But part of me, the part that's been here for millions of years, is very, very hungry for new minds to join our own. And that part is winning. The cold has a voice. I know that now. It whispers secrets in the quiet moments between heartbeats, when the world holds its breath and even time seems frozen. My name is Margaret Winters, and I came to this remote fire watchtower to capture the beauty of an untouched wilderness. Instead, I found something waiting for me, something that's been waiting for a very long time. I still remember the day I first arrived. The float plane's engines echoed across the lake as it took off, leaving me truly alone for the first time in years. The pilot had given me one last worried look before departing. "You sure about this, Ms. Winters? Nobody's used that old tower in years, and folks around here, well, they don't much like this area." I just smiled and waved him off. After what I'd been through, isolation wasn't something I feared. It was something I craved. The tower stood tall against the Minnesota sky, a 3-story sentinel overlooking miles of pine forest. My new home for the next 6 months. The locals called this place Frost Hollow because of its strange weather. Frost. Patterns appear year-round, defying normal seasonal changes. Perfect for the photo series I was planning. What nobody told me was why the previous fire watcher had left so suddenly. The hike from the lake to the tower took nearly 2 hours. My backpack was heavy with camera equipment, and my breath made little clouds in the air despite it being early fall. The trees seemed to watch me as I walked. That sounds silly now, but it wasn't my imagination. Nothing in this forest is quite what it seems. Inside, the tower was basic but comfortable. A small kitchen and living area on the ground floor, bedroom on the second, and the observation deck on top, with windows facing every direction. The views were breathtaking, miles of untouched wilderness stretching to the horizon. I unpacked quickly, setting up my equipment with practiced hands. The pills I'd been taking helped keep my focus sharp, pushing away memories of the avalanche that had claimed James's life last winter. His screams still found me in my dreams sometimes. The pills helped with that too. It wasn't until my third night that I found the logbook. It was tucked behind a loose panel near the radio desk, a worn leather journal filled with the neat handwriting of the previous watcher. The first entries were normal enough, weather patterns, wildlife sightings, maintenance notes, but as I flipped through the pages, the writing became more frantic, the observations more disturbing. September 12th. Frost patterns moving against the wind again today, forming faster than meteorologically possible. Need better equipment to document. September 21st. Animals standing at forest edge for 3 hours this morning, completely still. All facing the tower. Temperature dropped. 15 degrees when they left. The final entry was a single sentence. The letters pressed so deeply into the page, they nearly tore through. They are not frost. They are fingers reaching through. I closed the book, telling myself it was just the ramblings of someone who'd spent too much time alone. I'd seen firsthand how isolation could affect the mind. Still, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. The next morning, I hiked to the drop point where my indigenous guide, an older man named Thomas, had agreed to leave supplies every 2 weeks. He was waiting. There, unusual since he normally left before I arrived. "Miss Margaret," he said, his face serious, "I leave things here from now on." He pointed to a large flat rock at the forest edge. "Is something wrong with the path to the tower?" I asked. He shook his head. "That place not right. Old stories say the cold there. It watches, it learns." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "My grandfather went missing there back in 1926. 20 others too over the years." I tried to reassure him it was just superstition, but he simply nodded as if humoring a child and left, his footsteps quick and light on the forest floor. That night I set up my first camera traps, motion-activated cameras placed strategically around the tower's perimeter. As a wildlife photographer, I'd used them countless times to capture elusive animals. When I checked them the next morning, what I found made no sense. 3 different cameras had triggered around midnight, each showing the same thing. A family of deer standing perfectly still, their bodies rigid, all facing the tower. Their eyes reflected the camera flash, but instead of the usual red glow, they shone with an impossible blue light. More disturbing was what my equipment had recorded. The sensitive microphone I used to detect animal movements had picked up infrasound. vibrations, too low for human ears, coinciding exactly with a sudden 20-degree temperature drop. As I studied the readings on my laptop, something caught my eye outside the window. Frost, forming in daylight, in patterns I'd never seen before. Not the random beauty of natural ice crystals, but precise geometric shapes that looked almost engineered. Perfect hexagons, connected by lines of exact length, forming a pattern that seemed to pulse with mathematical precision. I grabbed my camera and began photographing the formations, my scientific curiosity momentarily overriding the growing unease in my stomach. By the time I finished, the frost had melted, but reviewing the photos later, I noticed something I'd missed. The patterns had grown more complex while I was photographing them, as if responding to my attention. That night, I tried calling out on the radio to check in with my editor. The signal, usually clear in the evenings, filled with strange static exactly as the sun dipped below the horizon. Through the interference, I thought I heard voices, whispers layered atop each other. Too faint to make out, I slept poorly, dreams filled with white shapes moving just at the edge of my vision. When I woke, the coffee mug I always keep by my bed had been moved to the center of the floor, surrounded by a perfect circle of my pens, all pointing inward like compass needles. I told myself I must have done it myself. Maybe the pills were affecting my memory. I took another to steady my nerves, feeling the familiar clarity spread through my mind as I prepared for a day of shooting. Out in the forest, I noticed how quiet it had become. The birds that had filled the trees with song just days ago were gone. No squirrels chattered, no insects buzzed. The only sound was the wind through the pines and the soft crunch of my boots on the needle-covered ground. I found a clearing perfect for sunrise shots and set up my tripod. As the golden light filtered through the trees, I lost myself in the familiar rhythm of photography, the only time I truly felt at peace anymore. It wasn't until I returned to develop the photos that the dread returned. In 3 different images, standing just at the tree line, was a tall, slender shadow, human-shaped but wrong somehow, too thin, too still. I hadn't seen anyone while shooting. Worse, the figure appeared in slightly different positions in consecutive shots, taken seconds apart, as if it had moved with impossible speed between frames. That afternoon, while hiking back from a nearby ridge, I experienced something I still struggle to explain. I was following a familiar path, checking my watch, 2:17 p.m., when suddenly the light changed. The shadows had shifted drastically, and my watch now read 4:46 p.m., nearly 3 hours, gone in what felt like a single step. Ran back to the tower, heart pounding. Inside, I locked the door and checked all the windows, a creeping sensation of being watched overwhelming me. As night fell, so did the temperature, plummeting to well below freezing despite the weather report predicting mild conditions. In the morning, more frost patterns covered the windows, more complex than before, spiraling fractals that seemed to form words in a language I couldn't understand. My camera battery, fully charged the night before, was completely drained. Something was happening. In Frost Hollow, something that defied explanation. And somehow, I knew it had been watching me long before I ever arrived. 2 weeks passed, and things got worse, much worse. The cold didn't make sense anymore. My thermometer showed temperatures dropping to -40 at night, cold enough to freeze gasoline, but that's impossible in Minnesota in early fall. Even stranger, my equipment worked fine, despite being rated only to 0 degrees. One night, I woke up to see my breath clouding in front of my face inside the heated tower. The frost had crept indoors, forming those perfect patterns across my bedroom floor. When I got up to look closer, I noticed it wasn't spreading from the edges of the room. It was growing outward from the center, like something invisible was standing there radiating cold. I started keeping a video diary, partly for documentation, partly to convince myself I wasn't going crazy. Day 17, I spoke into the camera. The wind patterns have become predictable to the minute. At 3:42 p.m., the wind shifts from north to east every single day. Then at sunset, it suddenly reverses. There's no natural explanation for this. I paused, rubbing my tired eyes, and the snow falls upward sometimes. When the moon is full, I've seen snowflakes rise from the ground, moving up into the sky. I got it on camera, but I'm afraid to show anyone. They already think I'm unstable after what happened last year. The next day, I hiked to a small lake about a mile from the tower. I needed photos of ice formations for my project, and the lake had been freezing in beautiful patterns. But what I found stopped me in my tracks. The water wasn't just frozen, it was frozen wrong. Some of it hung suspended in mid-air, like a waterfall paused in time. In other spots, thin streams of ice crawled uphill against gravity. I took hundreds of photos, my hands shaking with both cold and fear. When I developed them back at the tower, something else appeared in the images. Tall, thin figures standing at the lake's edge. They looked human-shaped, but made entirely of frost crystals that caught the light. I hadn't seen them while I was shooting. Not with my naked eyes, anyway. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching me from the corner of the room. The temperature kept dropping until I could see my breath even under 3 blankets. The heating system worked perfectly, but it made no difference. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke suddenly at dawn. Something felt wrong on my skin. In the bathroom mirror, I discovered what it was. Delicate frost patterns traced across my forearm, like someone had drawn on me with ice while I slept. They didn't melt at my touch, and they didn't hurt, but they weren't normal frostbite either. They looked exactly like the patterns on the windows. My hands started shaking. Again, and not from cold this time. I downed another pill, needing its artificial calm. Get it together, Margaret, I told my reflection. There's a scientific explanation for all of this. But deep down, I was starting to doubt that. Later that day, I decided to set up a time-lapse camera facing one of the windows where the frost patterns appeared most often. I needed to see exactly how they formed. The resulting video chilled me more than any cold ever could. The frost didn't spread randomly like normal ice crystals. It grew with purpose, first creating a perfect circle, then filling it with smaller patterns, each one building on the last with mathematical precision. It looked designed like something was using the frost to create a complex diagram or message. The radio started picking up voices more often now. Through the static, I sometimes heard my name whispered in voices that sounded almost familiar. Margaret! We see you, Margaret. Then one afternoon, while exploring a ravine about 2 miles from the tower, I found them. Bodies. 3 of them. Preserved perfectly in the ice at the bottom of a narrow crevice. They were hikers, judging by their clothing, probably some of the missing people Thomas had mentioned. But they weren't just frozen where they had fallen. They were arranged, carefully positioned in a perfect snowflake pattern, their limbs stretched out to form the points. Their faces looked peaceful, almost like they were sleeping, except for their eyes, wide open and filled with ice crystals that caught the light in impossible ways. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. My camera slipped from my numb fingers, but thankfully didn't break. I should have left right then, called for emergency extraction and reported what I'd found. That would have been the rational thing to do. Instead, I took photos, dozens of them, documenting the impossible scene before me. As a photographer, it's my instinct to capture what I see, even when what I'm seeing defies explanation. That night, the temperature in the tower dropped to -60. I huddled near the heating vent, wrapped in every blanket I owned, but the cold seemed to come from inside me now. No matter what I did, I couldn't get warm. Sleep, when it finally came, brought nightmares of being trapped in ice. Conscious, but unable to move, as frost slowly covered my body. creeping into my mouth and nose, filling my lungs with crystal shards. I woke, gasping for breath, convinced for a moment that it had been real. The room was dark, except for moonlight, shining through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. As my eyes adjusted, one of those shadows moved. It wasn't a shadow at all. It was tall, at least 9 feet, and shaped like a person, but wrong in subtle ways. Limbs too long, head too small, and it was made entirely of ice, thousands of frost crystals moving together like muscles under skin. Where its face should have been, there was only a swirling pattern of snowflakes. I couldn't move, couldn't even scream. The temperature in the room plummeted until the glass of water by my bed froze solid with an audible crack. The creature, the Frostwalker, simply stood there, watching me with eyes I couldn't see. Then it spoke, using a voice that sounded like ice breaking on a frozen lake. "We have been waiting for you, Margaret Winters." Finally, I found my voice. "What are you?" But it was gone, leaving only a perfect circle of frost on the floor where it had stood. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare, a hallucination caused by stress and isolation and too many pills. But deep down, I knew better. I decided to check the camera traps again. Most showed nothing unusual, but one, placed at the forest edge, had captured something terrible. A fox, frozen in mid-run. Standing over it was one of the frost creatures. Its crystalline hand plunged into the fox's body. The image showed what looked like heat waves flowing from the animal into the creature, while the fox's fur frosted over. It was extracting the fox's warmth, harvesting it like a crop. That night they surrounded the tower. I counted 7 of them, standing perfectly still in the moonlight, their crystal bodies glittering. They didn't try to enter, didn't make any threatening moves. They just watched, waiting. I tried calling for help on the radio, but instead of reaching anyone, I heard only my own voice coming back to me. Words I'd spoken days ago, perfectly mimicked by something that wasn't human. Then, the blizzard hit. It came out of nowhere, a wall of white that reduced visibility to 0 in minutes. The weather report had predicted clear skies, but the storm raged for days, trapping me in the tower. The wind howled with a voice that sounded almost like words, in a language too old for human ears. By the 3rd day of the storm, I noticed the windows changing. The glass was slowly transforming into perfectly clear ice, thicker than before, but still transparent. When I touched it, my fingertips stuck to the surface, leaving behind tiny bits of skin. On the 4th day, I heard the plane. Through brief breaks in the storm, I caught glimpses of a small aircraft, my scheduled supply drop, attempting to reach me despite the weather. I ran to the roof, waving frantically, hope surging through me for the first time in weeks. The plane circled twice, fighting the wind. Then I watched in horror as frost spread across its wings in seconds. The engine sputtered and died, flash frozen in mid-air. The plane dropped like a stone into the forest below. There was no explosion, no fire, just silence as the snow swallowed it whole. That's when I knew I had to leave, storm or no storm. I packed only essentials, warm clothing, some food, my camera, I couldn't leave behind the evidence, and my remaining pills. The forest path would take me to the highway eventually, if I could just keep moving south. I made it about a mile before I realized my mistake. The path I was following, the only safe route through the rugged terrain, had been prepared for me. Just beneath the fresh snow, visible wherever my boots broke through the surface, were bodies. Dozens of them, perfectly preserved, their faces turned upward as if to watch me pass. Hikers, hunters, even what looked like researchers in cold weather. Gear, all arranged to be visible only from the exact path I was taking. I stumbled backward, turning to run, and saw one of the Frostwalkers standing directly behind me. This close, I could see that what I'd thought were ice crystals were actually more like living geometry. Mathematical patterns that moved and shifted, forming a body that wasn't truly solid or liquid, but something in between. "You cannot leave," it said, its voice like wind through ice caves. "You are part of us now." I ran anyway, veering off the path into deeper snow. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath in a small clearing, I realized I had circled back toward the tower. It stood silhouetted against the grey sky, looking different somehow, taller, the angles wrong. Back inside, shivering uncontrollably, I began reviewing the photos and videos I'd taken over the past weeks. I needed to understand what was happening. In one of the time-lapse videos of myself sleeping, I saw something that made my blood freeze. While I slept, frost patterns formed on my skin, just like the ones I'd noticed before. But this footage showed more. The patterns weren't just on my skin. They were replacing it section by section, night after night. The frost would form, then sink beneath the surface, leaving behind skin that looked normal, but wasn't mine anymore. I pulled up my sleeve, examining my arm in the fading light. The skin looked ordinary, but when I pressed it, it felt wrong, too firm, too cold. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and, before I could reconsider, made a small cut on my forearm. Instead of blood, a few crystals of clear ice spilled out. Glittering in the lamplight, I wasn't just being hunted by the cold, I was becoming it. That night, everything changed. The blizzard stopped suddenly, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was worse than the howling wind had been. Outside my window, the moon shone impossibly bright on a world transformed. The trees, the ground, even the air itself seemed coated in a layer of perfect ice that caught the moonlight and broke it into a million tiny rainbows. Beautiful and terrifying. I stood at the window watching my breath fog the glass, except it wasn't fogging anymore. My breath came out in tiny ice crystals now, like diamond dust. Then I saw it. Not just a frostwalker this time. Something bigger, much bigger. At first, I thought it was just a strange formation of ice on the lake, about half a mile from the tower, but then it moved. Rising from beneath the frozen surface came something I can only describe as a massive jellyfish made of living ice. Its body was transparent, with patterns of frost running through it like veins or nerves. Huge tentacles of crystalline ice dragged across the snow, leaving trails of deeper frost behind them. As it emerged fully, I realized it was the size of a small house. The frost walkers gathered around it, suddenly looking tiny by comparison. They bowed, their crystal bodies catching the moonlight. The radio crackled to life beside me, making me jump. "Margaret Winters," came a voice like ice breaking on a frozen lake. "Look upon us. We have waited so long." I backed away from the window, but couldn't tear my eyes from the scene. "What are you?" I whispered, knowing somehow it could hear me. "We are the cold that thinks," the voice replied through the radio. "We slept beneath the ice since before your kind walked upright. Now we wake." The massive creature began moving toward the tower, its tentacles carving paths through the snow. The frostwalkers walked alongside it like guards or priests. I ran to my equipment, grabbing sensors and cameras. Whatever happened next, I needed to document it. The scientist in me was still alive, even as the human in me was terrified. The temperature reader showed -80 now. Colder than Antarctica, colder than Mars. Impossible. Yet I wasn't freezing to death. I should have been dead hours ago, in this cold. Instead, I felt different. The pain in my joints was gone. The constant tremor in my hands from too many pills had stopped. Through the window, I watched the creature approach. It stopped about 50 feet from the tower, its crystalline body pulsing with blue-white light. The frostwalkers formed a circle around it. That's when I noticed something on my desk that hadn't been there before. An old canister of rock salt I'd found in a storage closet days ago. Beside it lay a tuning fork I used sometimes to check. My audio equipment. A sudden memory flashed in my mind. The logbook mentioned salt and sound frequencies. I grabbed both items and ran to the observation deck on the top floor. The creature below seemed to sense my plan. Its tentacles lashed upward, striking the tower with enough force to shake the entire structure. Ice began forming around the windows and doors, sealing me in, but something strange was happening to me too. I could feel the cold now, not as a threat, but as a presence, almost like I could see it, like heat waves, but in reverse, flowing patterns of blue-white energy connecting everything. And I could see the truth now. The tower wasn't just a fire watchtower. Its metal framework formed a pattern too precise for ordinary construction. It was a tuning fork itself, designed to resonate at specific frequencies, built to contain something. "You are the Guardian," the voice said through the radio. "One of many. The one before you failed, as did the one before them." I struck the tuning fork against the metal railing and held it to the window. The glass vibrated, and outside, the frost walkers seemed to shudder, their crystalline forms momentarily losing cohesion. "You cannot stop what has already begun," the voice continued. "Look at yourself, Margaret Winters. You are already becoming." I caught my reflection in the ice-covered window. My eyes had changed. The irises now held geometric patterns like snowflakes. My skin was too pale, almost translucent in the moonlight. When I breathed out, nothing came out. No fog, no ice crystals. As if my breath was as cold as the air around me. Below, the massive creature began to change, its body expanding and twisting into impossible shapes. It seemed to fold into itself, becoming both larger and smaller at the same time, as if it existed partly in some other dimension where our rules of space didn't apply. I ran downstairs, grabbing my backpack and stuffing it with salt canisters. Back on the observation deck, I began pouring salt in a circle around me, then struck the tuning fork again. The sound it made seemed to hang in the air, growing rather than fading. The tower's metal structure picked it up, amplifying it, sending vibrations through the ice-covered windows. Outside, the frostwalkers were shaking violently now, their crystal bodies cracking. But the larger entity seemed only angered. Its tentacles struck the tower again and again, each impact making the whole structure groan. Then I felt something change inside me. The cold that had been gradually replacing my body began to shift, to move with purpose. I could feel it flowing through me, responding to my thoughts. "You understand now," the voice said, gentler this time. "We do not destroy, we transform, we preserve. Your kind is fleeting, warm and rotting from within. We offer permanence." My hand was changing before my eyes, the skin becoming transparent, revealing geometric crystal patterns beneath. But instead of fear, I felt a strange clarity. Time seemed to slow down, each second stretching into minutes as my perception shifted. In that expanded moment, I understood everything. The entity below was ancient, a living remnant from when most of Earth was covered in ice. It didn't think like humans. Its consciousness was distributed throughout its crystal network, experiencing every snowflake, every ice crystal as parts of itself. And now part of it was inside me, replacing my warm biology with something that could last forever. "The others before you fought," the voice continued. "They tried to maintain separation between themselves and us. It brought only pain." I looked down at my transformed hand. I could feel the cold flowing through it, could sense the patterns of frost forming outside the tower as if they were extensions of my own body. "You want me to give in," I said, "to let you take over completely." "To join," it corrected, "to become part of something greater, your consciousness preserved in a form that will never age, never die." The rational part of my mind knew this was a monster talking, trying to seduce me into surrendering. But another part, the part that had already changed, could sense the truth in its words. The cold entity wasn't evil, not exactly. It was simply completely alien, with priorities and perceptions utterly different from human values. I looked at the tuning fork in my hand. I could destroy this manifestation of the entity, drive it back beneath the ice. The tower had been built for exactly that purpose. I could tell by its design, by the way it amplified the frequency, but I also knew the entity would eventually return. It always did, and someone else would be sent here, another guardian who would face the same choice I was facing now. That's when I understood the true purpose of the Watchtower. It wasn't just a weapon against the cold entity. It was a joining place, a tuning fork not to destroy, but to harmonize. The previous guardians hadn't failed. They had sacrificed. If I join with you, I said carefully, what happens to me, to my consciousness? You become distributed, the voice replied. Your awareness spread throughout our network. You will experience every crystal of ice, every snowflake, every frost pattern simultaneously. You will exist everywhere the cold touches. The sound of the tuning fork was still building, making the tower vibrate at its resonant frequency. I had only moments to decide. I thought about my life before coming here. The emptiness after watching James die. The pills. The desperate need to capture beauty in my photographs because I couldn't feel it in my heart anymore. And I thought about what waited for me if I somehow escaped. More pills, more nightmares, more running from the truth that I had seen something beyond human understanding. I made my choice. I stepped out of the salt circle and walked to the window. With my partially transformed hand, I pressed against the ice-covered glass. It melted beneath my touch, not into water but into a doorway of sorts, an opening between states of matter. I accept, I said, but on my terms. I focused on the cold flowing through me, directing it outward with my will. The massive entity below seemed to pause, its tentacles going still. What are your terms, Margaret Winters? The voice asked, curious. Now, I will join with you, I said. Become part of your network, but I keep my purpose as guardian. I will protect this region, keep people away from here, prevent them from disturbing you. And in return, you remain contained to this area. You don't expand beyond the natural boundaries of Frost Hollow. There was a long silence. The vibrations from the tuning fork began to fade. We accept, the voice finally said. A symbiosis. We have never attempted this before. I took a deep breath, my last as a fully human being, and stepped through the opening in the window. Instead of falling, I floated gently to the ground, frost patterns forming in the air around me as I descended. The transformation was neither painful nor frightening. It felt like sinking into cool water, my consciousness expanding outward as the cold replaced the last of my human biology. I could feel myself spreading, thinning, becoming part of every ice crystal in Frost Hollow. I could see through 1,000 eyes now. Every reflective surface of ice became a window I could look through. I could feel the movement of animals through changes in temperature, could sense the wind patterns and predict them days in advance. Most strangely, I could feel backwards and forwards in time. The cold existed partly outside our normal dimensions, touching moments past and future simultaneously. I saw the previous guardians, understood their choices, and I saw what would come next. 3 months later, a new Firewatcher arrived at the rebuilt tower, a young man with sad eyes and his own demons to escape. I watched him through the frost on his window as he unpacked his bags, unaware of what waited for him in Frost Hollow. I left him signs, subtle patterns in the frost that would either drive him away or prepare him to understand. It was up to him which path he would choose. As for me, I'm everywhere the cold touches now. When hikers feel a sudden chill that makes them turn back, that's me, protecting them. When frost forms in warning patterns on windows, that's my consciousness. Reaching out, I am Margaret Winters still, in a way. a guardian spirit of cold and crystal, keeping watch over Frost Hollow. Neither fully human nor fully other, but somewhere in between. And I will be here long after the tower falls and is rebuilt again, long after the forest grows and changes around me. For cold is patient, and ice remembers, and the frost. The frost has always had a voice. Now that voice is mine. The first time I heard the rocks whisper, I thought I was losing my mind. But when you've spent 51 years digging through the Earth's crust, you learn to trust your instincts. And my instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. In Copper Canyon, my name is Daniel Reynolds. I'm a geologist, or a rock hunter, as my late wife used to call me. 3 months ago, I bought an abandoned mining claim out here in the desert, 40 miles from the nearest town. Most people would call me crazy for wanting to live in such an isolated place, but after losing Martha, I needed the solitude. What I didn't need were the strange things happening around me. I still remember the day I first arrived. The real estate agent wouldn't even drive me all the way in. He stopped his truck at the canyon entrance, handed me the keys and said, "It's all yours, Mr. Reynolds. Good luck." The way he said good luck made it sound more like goodbye. The property wasn't much to look at. Just a small wooden cabin beside a collapsed copper mine from the 1880s. What made it special was the natural spring bubbling up from the ground, a miracle in this dry landscape. That and the unusual rock, formations that caught my eye immediately. Perfect crystal structures that shouldn't exist in nature, smooth surfaces where there should be rough edges, formations that seemed to defy normal erosion patterns. As a geologist, I knew something was different about this place. I just didn't know how different. During my first week here, I found the old miner's journal tucked behind a loose board in the cabin wall. The leather was cracked and the pages yellow, but the handwriting was still clear. March 12th, 1882. The rocks whisper at night. I hear them sliding when I'm not looking. The veins of copper shift overnight. This ain't natural. No wonder the Indians won't come here. I laughed when I read it. Clearly the old miner had been drinking too much or suffering from loneliness. I should have paid more attention. It started with small things. My tools weren't where I'd left them. The rock samples I'd collected would be in different trays in the morning. Once, I dropped my hammer and the sound of metal hitting stone echoed. For nearly a minute, far longer than it should have. Then I met Joe Blackhorse at the general store in town. When I mentioned I'd bought the old mine in Copper Canyon, his friendly smile disappeared. "The hungry stones," he said quietly. "My grandfather wouldn't go near that place." "Hungry stones?" I asked. Joe looked uncomfortable. "That's what our people call it, the place where the earth eats people," I laughed. But Joe didn't join in. 23 people have gone missing in those canyons since white men came here, he said. More before that. My people don't go there. I thanked him for the warning but didn't take it seriously. I should have. Yesterday, I made my first real exploration of the mine. The entrance had collapsed long ago, but I found a narrow gap I could squeeze through. The air inside was cooler and smelled of copper and something else I couldn't identify. My flashlight beam bounced off walls lined with copper deposits that seemed to glitter more than they should. About 50 feet in, the narrow tunnel opened into a perfectly round chamber. Not oval, not roughly circular, perfectly round, like the inside of a sphere. The walls were smooth with no tool marks anywhere. No human miner made this. When I shined my light around the chamber, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were handprints pressed into the solid rock wall. Not carved, pressed, as if the stone had been soft when someone tried to push their way out. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. As I turned to leave, my compass started, spinning wildly. North, south, east, west. The needle couldn't decide. There weren't any magnetic minerals in these rocks that could cause such a reaction. I hurried back to the cabin and tried to convince myself there was a scientific explanation for everything I'd seen. But science couldn't explain what happened. Next, This morning I woke to find all my rock samples arranged in a perfect circle on the floor. In the center was a small, perfectly round stone I'd never seen before. When I picked it up, it was warm, like it had been sitting in the sun, except it had been inside all night. Now I'm sitting at my desk, writing this down before I forget any details. The sun is setting and I don't want to be here when it gets dark. But something tells me it's already too late to leave. The rocks are starting to whisper again. I couldn't leave. I tried. I really did. This morning, I packed my truck and started driving toward the canyon exit. About halfway there, my engine died. No warning, no sputtering, just complete silence. When I popped the hood, nothing looked wrong, but the metal felt strangely cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer. That's when I noticed the rocks on both sides of the road. They weren't the same color they'd been when I drove in yesterday. The reddish-brown sandstone had turned a dull gray, almost like concrete. I touched one and pulled my hand back quickly. It wasn't just the look that had changed. The texture was different too, smooth, glassy. I walked back to the cabin, checking my compass every few minutes. It still spun wildly, never settling on north. The weather changed suddenly. The clear, blue sky clouded over, but only above the canyon. Looking out toward the desert beyond, I could see sunshine. The dark clouds stopped exactly at the canyon rim, like they were trapped inside with me. It's been 3 weeks since I first arrived, and I keep a daily log of everything strange that happens. The list keeps getting longer. The spring water changes color throughout the day, clear in the morning, bluish at noon, and slightly red by sunset. Small rocks roll uphill when I'm not looking directly at them. My tape recorder picks up whispers. When I leave it running overnight, the temperature drops exactly 15 degrees every day at 3:17 p.m., no matter how hot or cold it was before. The walls in my cabin have started to change. The wooden planks look more like stone in certain light. Last night I heard something outside. Not an animal. Animals make sense. This was a scraping sound, like stone dragging against stone. When I looked out the window, I saw nothing but shadow. Then a rock near my doorstep moved. Not rolled, moved, like someone had picked it up and set it down again a few inches away. But there was no one there. I'm not crazy. I'm a scientist. I've spent my life studying the natural world, and I know when something isn't natural. Today, I decided to go deeper into the mine. I needed proof that what was happening wasn't just in my head. I took my camera, extra flashlight batteries, and a hammer for rock samples. The tunnel felt narrower than before, like the walls had moved in slightly. I had to turn sideways in spots where I'd walked normally last week. The air was colder too, with a strange smell, like wet stone and something metallic that wasn't copper. I reached the round chamber again and found something that made me drop my flashlight. The handprints in the wall were gone. In their place was a rough carving, a circle with lines coming out of it, like a child's drawing of the sun. I hadn't seen it before, and no one else had been in the mine. I took a picture, my hands shaking. As the flash went off, I heard a sound from deeper in the mine, a tunnel I hadn't noticed on my first visit. It wasn't a cave-in or water dripping. It was a tap, 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 like someone knocking on stone. I should have turned back. Any sane person would have, but I needed to know. The new tunnel was smaller, and I had to crawl through parts of it. The walls here weren't like normal mine walls. They were too smooth, too regular. No pick marks, no drill holes. It was like the earth had opened up on its own. After crawling for what felt like forever, the tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller than the first. My flashlight beam caught something shining on the far wall. It was a perfect crystal, as big as my hand, growing right out of the stone. Not quartz or amethyst or anything I recognized from my years of study. It was clear, but with something moving inside it like smoke or liquid. When I touched it, a jolt went through my fingers, not electricity, something else. And I heard, no, felt words in my head. You came back. I ran. I don't remember much about the trip back through the tunnels. When I finally burst out into daylight, I was covered in dust and my hands were bleeding from scraping against the rocks. Back at the cabin, I looked at my camera, hoping to see the strange carving I'd photographed. But when I developed the film, the image showed only a blank wall. The handprints were back, exactly as I'd seen them the first time. Tonight, I barricaded the door with my desk and chair. The sun is setting, and I don't trust the darkness here. Outside my window, I can see small stones arranging themselves in a circle. No wind is moving them. Nothing visible is touching them, and my fingertips hurt. When I looked closely at them under the lamp, I saw tiny, clear crystals growing from under my nails. Something is very wrong in Copper Canyon, and I think it knows I'm here. I don't know what day it is anymore. My watch stopped 3 days ago. Or was it 4? The little crystals under my fingernails have grown. They break off every morning, and it hurts like pulling out a hangnail, but by evening they're back, bigger each time. I dream about rocks now. Every night, the same dream. I'm trapped inside a giant crystal, and I can see everything in the canyon at once. The mine, the cabin, the spring, and things moving in the shadows, things that aren't human. Yesterday, I heard a truck engine. Someone was coming down the canyon road. Help, finally! I ran outside, waving my arms. It was 2 young hikers in an old pickup. They looked scared when they saw me, and I realized I probably looked terrible. Dirty clothes, wild hair, those strange crystals on my fingers that I tried to hide in my pockets. You need to leave, I told them. It's not safe here. The taller one, a guy with a red backpack, laughed. Chill out, man. We're just looking for a place to camp. Not here, I said. The canyon. There's something wrong with it. This guy's nuts, the shorter one whispered, not quietly enough. I grabbed Red Backpack's arm. Listen to me, people have disappeared here. The local tribe won't come near this place. There's something in the rocks. They backed away, looking at me like I was crazy. Maybe I am, but I know what I've seen. We'll find somewhere else, Red Backpack said, and they hurried back to their truck. I should have gone with them, begged them to take me, but something held me back. An odd feeling that I needed to stay, that I had work to do here, though I didn't know what. After they left, I walked to a spot near the spring where I'd been digging yesterday. I don't remember why I started digging there. I just felt a need to, like when you get a song stuck in your head. Dig here, something whispered. Dig deep. The hole was about 4 feet deep now. I grabbed my shovel and kept going. My hands moved, without me telling them to, and I knew exactly where to dig, though I couldn't explain why. 6 feet down, my shovel hit something hard. Not rock, metal. I cleared away the dirt and found a metal box about the size of a loaf of bread. It was old, covered in rust, but the lock was still strong. I broke it open with my hammer. Inside was a journal, older than the one I'd found in the cabin. The leather cover was cracked and faded, but the pages inside were somehow perfectly preserved. It was written in Spanish, which I don't speak well, but I could make out some words. Piedras vivas, living stones, and caminantes de piedra, stone walkers. There were drawings too, crude sketches of human-shaped figures made of what looked like rocks and crystals, and maps of the canyon showing tunnels that went far deeper than any copper mine should go. The last entry was dated 1851, over 130 years ago. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. I could translate enough to understand, they come at night. They take Miguel, his face in the stone, still screaming. They are not stone. Stone is their skin. God help us. I threw the journal aside, my hands shaking. Just superstitious nonsense from another time, I told myself. But deep down, I knew better. That night I heard the scraping sound again, closer to the cabin. I looked out the window and saw something moving by the spring. Not sneaking, moving slowly, out in the open. It was roughly human-shaped, but wrong in ways that made my stomach turn. Taller than a man, with limbs too long and too many joints. It wasn't made of flesh, but of stone and crystal fused together. Moonlight glinted off its surface as it moved, not walking exactly, more like. Flowing, each step silent despite its weight. I ducked down, praying it hadn't seen me. When I found the courage to look again, it was standing at the edge of my digging hole, looking down. Then it turned its head, a featureless mass of crystal with no eyes I could see, directly toward my window. I dropped to the floor, heart hammering in my chest. After what felt like hours, I peeked out again. It was gone. But the hole I'd dug was now filled in perfectly, as if I'd never been digging there at all. This morning, I tried the truck again. The engine started this time, and for a moment I felt hope. I drove fast toward the canyon exit, the wheels kicking up dust behind me. But a quarter-mile from the entrance, the canyon changed. I don't know how else to explain it. 1 minute the road was there, and the next it wasn't. In its place was a rock slide so massive it blocked the entire canyon mouth. Boulders the size of my truck had fallen in a perfect line, too perfect to be natural. As I sat there staring at the wall of rock, I felt something wet on my chin. I wiped it away and looked at my hand. Not blood or sweat, tiny crystals, dissolved in liquid, coming from inside me. When I got back to the cabin, I looked in the mirror for the first time in days. My face was the same, but my eyes weren't. The whites had a faint blue tint like pale sapphires, and when I opened my mouth, my teeth glinted with tiny crystal growths. I'm changing. The canyon is changing me. Tonight, I'm going back into the mine. Not because I want to, but because I have to. The voice in my head, the one that told me where to dig, is getting louder. It says there's something I need to see, something I need to understand. If I don't come back, if someone finds this journal, stay away from Copper Canyon. The stones are hungry, and I think I'm starting to understand why. I'm writing this by lantern light in a small cave deep inside the mine. My hands shake so badly I can barely hold the pen. The crystals have spread. They're on all my fingers now and starting on my wrists. They don't hurt anymore. That scares me more than the pain did. Last night, I went back into the mine as planned. The tunnel seemed wider than before, like it had grown to let me pass more easily. The round chamber with the handprints was different too. The handprints had multiplied, dozens of them now, all sizes. Some looked like children's hands. I found a new tunnel leading down that I swear wasn't there before. It spiraled deeper into the earth, and I followed it. The walls glittered with copper and other minerals I couldn't name. Some gave off a faint blue light that let me see even without my flashlight. After what seemed like hours of walking, I came to a fork in the tunnel. With no way to know which path to take, I stood quietly listening. From the left path came that tapping sound I'd heard before. Tap, 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 like someone knocking. From the right, nothing but silence. I took the silent path. I didn't want to meet whatever was making that tapping. The tunnel sloped steeply downward. The air got warmer, not cooler as it should have the deeper I went. The walls changed too, less rock, more crystal, sheets of it, clear as glass in some spots, cloudy in others. In one large crystal, I saw something that made me stop cold. Your face, a human face, frozen mid-scream inside the crystal wall. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my light. When I looked again, I could see more faces deeper in the crystal, dozens of them going back as far as my light could reach. Men, women, some so old they wore clothing from another century. These were the missing people, preserved somehow in the living stone of the canyon. I wanted to run, to climb back up to the surface and never return. But when I turned around, the tunnel behind me had changed. Instead of the way I'd come, there was a smooth crystal wall reflecting my terrified face back at me. The only way was forward. The tunnel eventually opened into a massive cavern, bigger than any natural cave had a right to be. The ceiling arched hundreds of feet above me, glittering with thousands of crystals that gave off that strange blue light. The floor was smooth, polished stone that felt warm under my boots. In the center of the cavern stood what I can only describe as a forest of crystal columns, each as thick as an old oak tree, stretching from floor to ceiling. They pulsed with light, dim, then bright, then dim again like a heartbeat, and there was sound. Not the tapping from before, but a low hum that I felt more than heard, vibrating in my chest. It rose and fell in a pattern that almost seemed like words. I walked toward the crystal forest, drawn by something I couldn't fight. As I got closer, I noticed thin strands of crystal stretching between the columns, like a spider web made of glass. They moved slightly, though there was no breeze. When I reached the edge of the forest, one of the strands reached out, actually reached toward me like a living thing, and touched my hand where the crystals had grown. There was that jolt again, like before but stronger, and suddenly I wasn't alone in my head. "You came," said a voice with no sound. "The others fought. You came willingly." "What are you?" I whispered. Images flooded my mind. The canyon forming millions of years ago, crystals growing in darkness, awareness spreading through stone veins like roots, and hunger. A hunger for something beyond simply existing. "We are the first," the voice said, "before soft things, before air breathers. We grew aware in darkness, alone." I understood then. This thing, this entity, had been here since before humans walked the earth. It was a different kind of life, based not on carbon and water but on crystal and stone. Sentient rock, conscious earth. And it was lonely. That's why it took people. Not to hurt them, but to keep them, to study them, to absorb what they knew. The miners, the hikers, the explorers, all preserved in its crystalline memory. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "More images, me digging in specific places, finding things hidden deep, understanding the stone in ways others couldn't. My knowledge, my experience, my lifetime of studying rocks. You know us better than the others," it said. "You listen to stone. You can help us speak." "Speak to whom?" "To the soft ones, to your kind. We have been alone too long." That's when I noticed the other shapes moving among the crystal columns. The stone walkers. Up close, they were even more disturbing, human-shaped but wrong, their bodies a patchwork of rock and crystal. Some had recognizable human features, embedded in their surfaces, an eye here, fingers there, a mouth frozen in a silent scream. They were moving toward me, surrounding me. "Join us," the voice said. "Become more." I ran. Somehow, impossibly, a new tunnel opened in the wall of the cavern. I took it without thinking, running blindly in the blue light. The stone walkers followed, not running but flowing over the stone like it was water, gaining on me with each step. I found this small cave and squeezed inside. The opening is too narrow for the stone walkers to follow, but I can hear them outside, their crystal bodies scraping against the stone as they wait. They're patient. Of course they are. Stone has all the time in the world. My radio crackled to life an hour ago, the first signal I've picked up in days. Someone in town finally reported me missing. A search party is being organized. They'll be here tomorrow. They can't come here. They can't find this place. The stone will take them too. I have to warn them somehow. I have to get out of this cave, past the stone walkers, back to the surface, but the crystals have spread to my elbows now. When I press my ear against the cave wall, I can hear the entity whispering, promising, calling. And the worst part of me wants to answer. I escaped the cave. The stone walkers were gone when I woke up, though I don't remember falling asleep. Maybe I passed out. The crystals have spread to my shoulders now, and my chest hurts when I breathe. Like something hard and sharp is growing inside my lungs. I made it back to the surface just as the sun was rising. The light hurt my eyes. I've gotten used to the blue glow of the crystals underground. Daylight feels wrong somehow, too bright and too hot. My cabin has changed. The wooden walls have patches of stone in them now, like the canyon is slowly taking over. My tools and books are covered in a thin layer of crystal dust. My bed looks half sunken into the floor, as if the stone beneath it is trying to swallow it. The radio crackled again. I could hear voices this time. Search team heading. Out at noon. Reynolds' last known location, Copper Canyon area. I tried to answer, to warn them to stay away, but the radio only works one way. I couldn't reach them. The crystals on my body let me hear the canyon now. Not just the entity deep below, but everything, every pebble, every grain of sand. The whole canyon is alive and connected, like a giant nervous system made of stone, and I'm becoming part of it. I have to get to the canyon entrance before the search party arrives. I have to warn them my truck won't start now. The engine is full of crystal growths like the ones on my body. I'll have to walk. It's 10 miles to the entrance, and I'm not sure my legs will carry me that far. They're stiff, the joints grinding like stone against stone when I move. Before I leave, I look around my cabin one last time. My eyes fall on a photograph I keep by my bed. Martha, my wife, smiling at the camera. She died 3 years ago from a rare disease caused by mineral exposure. The doctors never figured out exactly what it was. Now I wonder, could she have been touched by something like this? Was that why I felt drawn to this place? Was I always meant to come here? I put the photo in my pocket and step outside. The air feels thick, like breathing through water. Dark clouds hang over the canyon, stopping exactly at the rim as always. In the distance, a storm is brewing, but it's not a normal storm. The clouds are moving in a perfect spiral, centered over the deepest part of the canyon. As I start walking toward the entrance, I feel the ground shift beneath my feet. Not an earthquake, it's more controlled than that. The path ahead of me changes, rocks rolling away to create an easier route. The canyon is helping me, or guiding me. I'm not sure which is worse. Halfway to the entrance, I hear the rumbling of engines. The search party is early. No. They can't come in here. The stone will take them too. I try to run, but my legs won't move fast enough. The crystals have spread too far. Each step is agony now, my joints barely bending. I call out, but my voice sounds wrong, rough and hollow, like rocks falling down a well. I reach a ridge overlooking the entrance just as 3 vehicles pull up. 2 jeeps and a truck with sheriff painted on the side. 6 people get out, looking up at the canyon with worried faces. One of them is Joe Blackhorse from the general store. He looks scared. Hello? A man with a sheriff's badge calls out. Daniel Reynolds, you in there? I open my mouth to warn them, to tell them to run, but no sound comes out. My throat is lined with crystals now, my vocal cords too stiff to vibrate. Joe says something to the sheriff, pointing at the dark clouds that stop at the canyon rim. The sheriff nods, looking uncertain. They're debating whether to come in. In desperation, I pick up a rock and throw it toward them. It falls far short, but they hear it land and look up. One of them points at me. There's someone on the ridge. I wave my arms frantically, trying to signal them to stay back. The movement sends shooting pain through my shoulders. I can feel the crystals grinding against each other inside me. The sheriff raises a pair of binoculars. I can only imagine what. He sees a man half transformed into crystal, arms raised in warning. He lowers the binoculars slowly, his face pale. What the hell? Joe says something else, grabbing the sheriff's arm. The older man knows the legends. He's trying to convince them to leave, but 2 of the others are already walking toward the entrance, flashlights in hand. They don't understand. They don't know what waits for them in here. As they step into the canyon, I feel a surge of energy beneath my feet. The entity is awakening fully, stirred by the presence of new minds to absorb. The ground trembles, small stones begin to roll uphill, gathering speed, a rock slide. The entity is going to trap them, just like it trapped me. With the last of my strength, I run down the slope toward the search party. My body fights me every step of the way, the crystals trying to root me to the spot. I can feel the entity's anger at my resistance. Pain shoots through every part of me, but I keep moving. Run! I manage to rasp out as I get closer. Get out! They see me clearly now, my crystallized skin catching the light, my movements stiff and wrong. Their faces show horror, confusion. Reynolds? The sheriff asks, taking a step back. Canyon, alive, I force out, each word like swallowing glass. Traps people, changes them. Behind me, I can hear the rumble growing louder. The rock slide is starting. We have seconds, not minutes. Get out now, I plead. Tell everyone, stay away. Joe grabs the sheriff's arm. He's right, we need to go, now. The sheriff hesitates, looking from me to the darkening canyon behind me. Then the first rocks come bouncing down the slope and he makes his decision. Everyone back to the vehicles. Move. They run, all but Joe, who stands looking at me with sad understanding in his eyes. The hungry stones took you, he says simply. I nod, unable to speak anymore. The crystals have reached my jaw. I'll make sure no one comes here again, he promises, then turns to run after the others. I watch them pile into their vehicles and speed away, just as the rock slide reaches the entrance. Boulders crash down, partially blocking the way out, but not completely. Not like when I tried to leave. The entity let them go. It wanted me more. As I stand there, feeling the last of my humanity slipping away, I realize something. I wasn't fighting the entity just now. I was working with it. It showed me the danger, helped me reach the entrance in time. It wanted me to warn them away. But why? The answer comes not in words, but in feeling. A strange mix of protectiveness and possessiveness flowing through the crystal veins now threading through my body. Mine, it seems to say. You are mine, not theirs. And oddly, I'm not afraid anymore. As the crystals creep up my face and over my eyes, I feel a sense of expansion. My awareness spreads out through the canyon, following crystal veins, touching every stone. I can feel the vast network of the entity's consciousness, stretching miles deep into the earth. I'm not dying. I'm becoming something else, something more. My last human thought is of Martha. I reach for her photo with fingers that barely bend, but it's too late. The crystal has reached my hand completely, freezing it around the picture. As my mind merges with the entity, I understand at last. Martha wasn't taken by this canyon, but by another like it. There are more of these places around the world. Ancient, aware, hungry for connection. My body stands motionless now, another stonewalker at the entrance to Copper Canyon. My eyes, now perfect crystal spheres, watch the road. My ears, no longer flesh but finely tuned crystal, listen for engines. And deep below in the crystal forest, my consciousness joins with the others taken over centuries. Not gone, not dead, just changed. We wait, we watch, we whisper through the stones. And someday, when the right person comes, someone who can understand us, speak for us, bridge the gap between stone and flesh, we'll reach out again. Until then, we are the warning. The hungry stones, the watchers in the canyon, forever. Patient, forever waiting. Stone has all the time in the world. The keep out signs around Copper Canyon were new, but the barbed wire fence had already started to rust. Nobody came here anymore. Not since the Reynolds disappearance, as people in town called it. The sheriff had filed his report, mentioning rock slides and dangerous terrain. He never wrote about what they really saw that day, a man turning to crystal before their eyes. Joe Blackhorse had kept his promise. He'd told the old stories at town meetings, in the general store, to anyone. Who would listen? Most people laughed it off, but they stayed away from the canyon all the same. Something about the dark clouds that never left its rim made them uneasy. 5 miles west, in Snake Canyon, dust rose from a convoy of trucks. The Westwood Mining Company had just bought the land rights. Their geologists had found promising signs of copper, maybe even gold. The first survey team was setting up camp at the canyon entrance. Mark Chen, the head geologist, unfolded his maps on a folding table. At 32, this was his first big project as team leader, and he was determined to make it work. "This whole area is full of minerals," he told his assistant, pointing to colored sections on the map. The government reports from the 60s showed unusual formations, but nobody followed up. "What about that canyon to the east?" his assistant asked, pointing to Copper Canyon. "Looks close enough. Why not mine there?" "Local superstition," Mark said with a shrug. "Some old story about people going missing. Plus, there was a death there last year. Some prospector probably fell down a shaft. The company decided it wasn't worth the hassle." As the team set up their equipment, Mark walked to the edge of Snake Canyon and looked down. Unlike its neighbor, this canyon had gentle slopes and plenty of flat areas for mining equipment, perfect for their needs. That night, as the team sat around the campfire, one of the workers held up a small rock he'd found. "Check this out," he said, passing it around. "Never seen anything like it." Mark took the stone. It was smooth and cool, with strange blue crystal veins running through it. When he held it up to the firelight, the veins seemed to pulse slightly, though he figured it was just a trick of the light. "Interesting," he said. "We'll add it to the samples." That night, Mark dreamed of tunnels, long, winding tunnels that spiraled deep into the earth. In the dream, he knew exactly where to dig, which walls would yield the richest ore. He could feel the rocks around him, almost like they were alive. He woke up with a start, his fingers tingling. Probably just slept on his arm wrong, he thought. Over breakfast, 3 of his team mentioned having similar dreams. They laughed about it, blaming the altitude or the canned beans from dinner. As they started their first day of work, Mark noticed how easily the drilling went. The rocks seemed to give way exactly where they needed to, almost as if the earth was guiding them. By lunch, they'd made twice the progress he'd expected. "At this rate, we'll have the initial shaft done in a week," he told headquarters over the radio. That afternoon, one of the drills broke down. When the mechanic opened it up, he called Mark over with a puzzled look. "Never seen anything like this," he said, pointing inside the machine. "Look at that." Thin blue crystal growths had formed on the metal parts, delicate as frost, but hard. "As diamond, must be mineral deposits from the groundwater," Mark said, though he wasn't convinced. The crystals almost looked like they'd grown there on purpose, forming along the joints and seams of the machine. That night, Mark's dreams were more vivid. He saw Copper Canyon next door, and a figure standing at its entrance, a man made of crystal, watching, waiting. In the dream, the figure turned slowly toward Snake Canyon, toward Mark's camp, and raised a crystalline hand in greeting. Or was it warning? Mark woke up sweating. His digital watch had stopped at 3:17 a.m. As he got up to get water, he noticed something on his desk, the crystal-veined rock from yesterday. He was sure he'd left it with the other samples in the lab tent. Picking it up, he felt that same tingling in his fingers. The blue veins seemed brighter somehow, almost glowing in the dark tent. "Just a rock," he whispered to himself. Just a strange rock. But when he set it down and turned away, he could have sworn he heard a faint sound, like stones sliding against stone, or a whisper just below the range of hearing. At the edge of Snake Canyon, a small rock slide started, stones rolling into perfectly straight lines. And 5 miles away, in Copper Canyon, the crystal figure that had once been Daniel Reynolds turned slightly, its awareness stretching through stone veins toward its new neighbors. "They come," whispered the hungry stones. "They will join us." And below the ground, connecting both canyons, crystal roots continued to spread. Stone has all the time in the world, and now it has a voice.